Lot 31 was never supposed to be rented. I lived in a small trailer park outside Gainesville, Florida for about 3 years. It wasn't glamorous, but the rent was cheap. The neighbors kept to themselves, and most nights were quiet. We had maybe 40 trailers in a loop around a dirt road with patchy grass and dying street lamps. I was in Lot 12, a decent spot near the entrance. Everyone knew everyone's business eventually, but we mostly stayed out of each other's way. Except when it came to Lot 31. Lot 31 was cursed. That's how people talked about it. Nobody stayed there long. The trailer itself had been replaced twice, but no matter what, bad things happened. Fires, accidents, sudden illness. The last guy who lived there, Jimmy, disappeared one night. Just vanished. His truck was still in the drive. The lot sat empty for almost a year after that, but then this woman showed up out of nowhere. Drove in around dusk one evening with a trailer hitched to the back of a rusty van. She backed into Lot 31 like she'd done it 100 times before, stepped out, and just smiled. I watched her from my porch. She was maybe mid-30s, long black hair, pale as chalk, wearing a ratty sundress that didn't match the weather. It was January, but she didn't seem cold, just stood there, staring at the dirt like she was listening for something. The landlord didn't say much, but I heard through Jackie in Lot 17 that the woman paid 3 months' rent up front. Cash. No name, no phone. Just Ms. Lorne. That's all she wrote on the lease. First couple nights, it was quiet. Her trailer had no lights on after 9 p.m. No TV noise, no sign of life. But then, weird things started happening. Lights in other trailers flickering. Dogs barking at shadows. One morning, all 4 tires on my truck were slashed but not punctured. Sliced, clean, and precise. Then people started hearing things. Knocking on their walls around 3 a.m., but soft, like fingertips. The kind of sound that made you question if you imagined it. One guy claimed he heard someone whispering outside his window, but when he looked out, no one was there. Just Ms. Lorne's trailer across the lot. Completely dark. The scariest thing happened to me about 2 weeks after she moved in. I was walking back from the park's little laundromat just after midnight. I cut through behind Lot 31 because it was faster. As I passed the trailer, I heard something inside. It sounded like breathing, but it wasn't human. It was wet, deep, and it clicked between exhales like bones snapping in rhythm. I froze. Then I saw movement through the thin curtain, a silhouette crawling on the ceiling. Not walking. Crawling. I backed up slowly and tripped over a tree root. The noise inside stopped. Then the door opened. Not fast. Just a slow creak. Ms. Lorne stepped out, but it wasn't like she'd heard me. She just stood on the steps, barefoot, staring straight into the woods, still smiling. I didn't wait around. I got up and ran back to my trailer and locked the door. I stayed up all night, shotgun across my lap, eyes on her place. But nothing else happened. The next morning, the door to her trailer was wide open. No sign of her. No furniture. No lights. I went to the landlord's office, but he was already there, pale, shaking, muttering that he'd found something inside Lot 31. He wouldn't say what, but later that day, a sheriff's cruiser pulled in and an unmarked black SUV parked behind it. 2 men in suits went into the trailer with duffel bags and Geiger counters. I swear I heard one of them say, "Still active." By nightfall, the trailer was gone, towed off without a trace. The lot was taped off for 2 days. Then suddenly, the tape disappeared and everything went back to normal. Sort of. I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. I'd wake up hearing that same wet breathing. Always around 3 a.m. I'd sit up and stare out the window at the now empty Lot 31, trying to convince myself it was just in my head. One night, I saw footprints in the dirt leading from that empty lot right up to my steps. Bare feet, long toes. The prints stopped at my door, turned around, and walked back, but only half as deep, like something walked away lighter than it arrived. The next day, I asked Jackie if she'd seen anything strange. She said, yeah, her cat wouldn't go near the window facing Lot 31 anymore. It hissed and clawed at the glass every night. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. I think she left something behind, Jackie said. Or maybe something stayed after she left. She'd been waking up with nosebleeds, and once found a dead bird inside her dryer. No holes in the vent, it was just there. The landlord finally tried to rent Lot 31 again. Put up a sign, posted on Craigslist. A young couple moved in for 2 days, then left in the middle of the night without taking their deposit back. Just drove off. No explanation, no goodbye. That was when people started talking again. Some said it was a government experiment gone wrong. Others claimed Ms. Lorne wasn't human, that she was just a host, a vessel for something older. Whatever it was, it hadn't left. I tried moving parks, but every time I got close to finalizing a lease somewhere else, something went wrong. One place burned down a week before I was supposed to move in. Another had a gas leak. A third one just stopped returning my calls. It's like Lot 31 wants me here. Wants us all here. Trapped. I don't know why. I don't know what it's waiting for. But I started leaving salt at my windows. Old habit my grandmother taught me. She used to say salt stops the dead from walking in. 3 nights ago, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. My door was unlocked. I never leave it unlocked. On my floor were muddy footprints. Bare. Long. Leading from the door to my bed. And back out. I installed cameras the next day, front and back. Set them to record from 10 p.m. to sunrise. I checked the footage this morning. Around 3 a.m., the feed cuts to static for exactly 2 minutes and 17 seconds. When it returns, everything's the same except a faint shape standing at the edge of Lot 31. Not a person. Tall, thin, featureless. Just standing there. Watching. And then, gone. I showed the footage to a friend. He suggested it was a camera glitch, compression artifact. I wanted to believe him, but then he paused and said, "Why is the timestamp on that freeze frame a minute ahead of real time?" The system had recorded the future. I've started dreaming in static. Full darkness, except for the faint sound of knocking not on wood, but inside my head. I wake up sweating, nails broken, sheets torn. One morning, I found soil in my mouth. The landlord passed away last week. Natural causes, they said. Heart attack. But I heard from someone at the clinic that he died with his eyes wide open. Pupils dilated. Mouth frozen in a scream. Lot 31 is still empty. The grass never grows there. The dirt always looks disturbed, like something just clawed its way up and out. I don't know if it's waiting for her to return or if she never really left. All I know is this. Lot 31 was never supposed to be rented. And someday soon, it'll pick someone new. I moved into Lot 6 of Miller Creek Trailer Park during one of the worst storms of the year. My last place had flooded, and the landlord here gave me a good deal, $450 a month and no questions asked. That should have been my first red flag. The trailer was decent. 2 bedrooms, a sagging porch, and a busted window that whistled in the wind. But it was dry, and I was desperate. The neighbors barely looked at me as I moved in. Just kit stars, curtain shifting. It felt like I was being watched even before I signed the lease. On my first night, I heard something moving under the floor. Not mice, not pipes. Something heavier. It scraped, shifted, then stopped. I figured it was plumbing, settling, or rats, but then it knocked. 3 knocks, hollow and sharp, like something rapping on the underside of the floorboards right beneath my bed. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside, shining it underneath the trailer's base. Nothing. Just dirt and old cinder blocks. The second night, the knocking came back. Same time, 2:45 a.m., same rhythm. This time, I stomped on the floor. Whatever it was, went silent. But then I heard it again, this time near the kitchen, like it was crawling under the entire length of the trailer. I asked my neighbor across the way, a guy named Bo who always wore sunglasses even at night, if he'd ever had rats or raccoons under his place. He looked at me for a long time and said, "You're in Lot 6? I nodded. He just shook his head and muttered, "Didn't think they'd rent that one again." I asked him what he meant, but he just went back inside. The door locked behind him with a metallic click. That night, I barely slept. I put my mattress on the living room floor, as far from the center of the trailer as I could. But around 2:45, the knocking started again. This time, it didn't stop. It traveled bumping and dragging beneath the floor like something was circling me from below. Then I heard a voice, not clear at first. Just a whisper, distorted, like someone trying to speak underwater. But I caught one word: feed. I turned on every light in the house and blasted music just to drown it out. Eventually, it stopped. I started noticing things missing. Small at first, a spoon, a sock, a battery, then larger things. A toolbox disappeared from the porch. The trash can was dragged 40 feet across the lot. But there were no footprints. Just long drag marks in the dirt. The trailer park manager, a heavyset guy named Kurt, laughed when I asked if there were raccoons around. "Not around here," he said. "Not anymore." Then he walked away before I could ask what that meant. On the fourth night, I decided to stay up. I sat on the kitchen floor with my phone and a flashlight and waited. Right on time 2:45, the knocking started. But now it was faster, closer. And then, right under me, I heard scratching, like long nails on metal. The scratching turned into banging. Then the cabinet under the sink burst open, and something launched out not at me, but toward the floor vent near the fridge. I only saw it for a split second. Pale, hairless, with long limbs and black pits for eyes. I screamed and fell backward. By the time I got to the vent, it was gone. But the metal grill was bent, not from the outside, from the inside. I left that night, slept in my car at a Walmart parking lot, and called the health department the next day. I told them I thought there were dangerous animals in the crawl space. They promised to send someone out. No one ever came. Bo knocked on my door the next evening, said he saw my lights were off and wanted to check in. I told him what I saw. He didn't look surprised. "They say the land used to be a dumping ground," he said, "before the park was built. Chemicals, waste, some kind of lab." I laughed nervously, but he didn't. "That thing you saw?" he whispered. "You're lucky it didn't take more. Lot 6 has a history." Then he gave me something, a mason jar full of dark powder. "Salt and iron shavings," he said. "Line your windows and vents. It won't stop them, but it'll slow them down." I did exactly what he said. That night, the knocking didn't come, just silence, but that somehow felt worse, like it was waiting, like it was planning something. 2 nights later, the woman in Lot 8 went missing. No forced entry, no struggle. Just gone. Her back door was wide open, and her floor vent was twisted up like a soda can. Bo stopped answering his door. The manager's office was locked and dark. I was on my own. I started searching online, trying to find any history about the land, old maps, news clippings, and that's when I found it. In 1978, a research facility half a mile from the park was shut down for environmental violations. Rumors swirled about illegal gene experiments, toxic runoff, even underground testing. Nothing confirmed. But shortly after it closed, the trailer park was built. Cheap land, quick construction. There were whispers in old forums, posts from former residents claiming they saw things in the dirt at night, children who disappeared, pets vanishing. Lot 6 came up twice, both times followed by a missing person report. I decided I couldn't stay another night. I packed everything I could carry and planned to leave before sunset. But just as I opened the door, I saw them claw marks on the steps. Not scratches, handprints, 5 long fingers burned into the wood. I turned around to grab my bag and froze. The floor vent near the hallway was wide open, and from the darkness below, I heard breathing, heavy, eager. I ran. Didn't even lock the door. I jumped into my car and floored it out of the park. Didn't look back. Didn't slow down until I hit the interstate. I drove straight to a friend's place 2 hours away and never returned. I tried reporting it. No one took me seriously. "Trailer paranoia," the officer said. "Old pipes, bad dreams. But I know what I saw. And I know what I heard." Bo's trailer burned down a week later. No cause determined. No body found. The fire department said the blaze started from underneath, from inside the crawl space. The park is still open, still renting. Lot 6. Last I heard, a single mom moved in with 2 kids. I tried leaving a message with the office. No response. I doubt she was warned. If you ever find yourself in a cheap trailer with strange noises under the floor, don't assume it's rats. Don't wait for proof, because sometimes the things beneath us were never meant to surface. And sometimes they're hungry. Lot 6 taught me that there are things in this world that live below, waiting for just the right crack in the floor to pull you under. And once you hear the knocking, it's already too late. Everyone in our trailer park knew not to go near Lot 42. It sat at the edge of the property, tucked beneath a line of trees where the light didn't quite reach. The trailer was gutted years ago after a fire, and no one ever replaced it. But sometimes, late at night, lights would flicker inside it. I was 17 when I decided to see it for myself. My older brother dared me, and like an idiot, I said yes. I waited until after midnight, grabbed a flashlight, and headed out. The trailer was a burnt-out shell, warped metal, and charred wood. But as I stepped closer, my flashlight dimmed. I thought it was the batteries until I looked up. The inside of the trailer was glowing. A faint, pulsing white-blue light, like someone had strung up 1,000 LED bulbs and dimmed them to a heartbeat rhythm. I crept closer and stepped through the broken doorway. The second I crossed the threshold, the light vanished. Everything went black. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, bare feet slapping the warped floorboards. First behind me, then to my left, then in front of me. I held my breath. Something whispered my name. I ran. Didn't even look behind me. My flashlight flickered back to life once I hit the dirt path. I didn't tell my brother what happened. He would have laughed. But from that night on, I started seeing that blue light from my bedroom window. Sometimes it stayed on for minutes. Sometimes it blinked in patterns. Once, it pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm. 3 long flashes, 2 short ones. Over and over. I wrote it down. A friend told me it was Morse code for "get out." I started asking questions. Old neighbors, mostly. Most didn't want to talk. One woman finally told me the truth. A man had died in that trailer. Alone. Locked in. He was sick and started hallucinating. Said he saw light people watching him. Said they promised him peace. But when he was found, he'd clawed his eyes out. Walls covered in blood. No lights. No cameras ever caught anything. The lot was condemned after that, but the park never tore it down. 2 nights ago, I woke up to blue light inside my trailer. Not outside. Inside. It flickered across the hallway, coming from the bathroom. I walked over slowly, opened the door. No lights, but in the mirror, I saw something behind me. A shape, human but stretched. Long arms, no eyes, just light pouring from its face. When I turned around, nothing was there. But the light stayed in the mirror. Now it follows me. The lights blink even when I'm at school. In the rearview mirror, reflections in my phone. Always flickering. Always watching. And I think it wants me to come back to Lot 42. Last night, I found a note on my bed. Just 3 words, written in shaky block letters. Let it in. No one had been in my room. No one knew what I saw. I don't sleep anymore. The lights never stop now, and when I close my eyes, I see that face again. White, glowing, smiling without a mouth, waiting. I think I made a mistake. I think it followed me out. If you ever see a light where it doesn't belong, don't go near it. Don't follow it. And for God's sake, don't let it in. There's a trailer at the edge of the park that no one remembers arriving. It wasn't there one day, and then it was. Shiny, silver, and spotless. No car, no moving crew, no sound. Just suddenly. There. I noticed it on my way to work. I walk past that section every day. The lot had been empty for years, overgrown with weeds and broken fence posts, but now the grass was trimmed. A little porch light was on, even though it was mid-afternoon. I asked Mr. Harlan, who manages the park, about it. He squinted at me like I was crazy. We didn't rent out that lot, he said. "It's condemned. Power's been shut off there for a decade." I told him to come look, but when we got there, the trailer was gone. I know what I saw. I even remember the number. Lot 13B. But when I checked the park map, it stopped at Lot 13. No B. Nothing ever existed there officially, according to Harlan. But that night, when I came home from work, the trailer was back. I stared at it from the sidewalk. Every light inside was on. A silhouette moved past the front window, tall, slow, arms slightly too long. Then the porch light flicked off, like it was inviting me closer. I don't know what possessed me to walk up those steps. I just felt drawn in, like gravity had shifted toward the trailer. But when I reached the door, it creaked open on its own. Inside was pitch black, despite all the lights I'd seen seconds earlier. Something smelled off like copper and old wood soaked in rain. The floor felt too soft, like walking on a wet sponge. I stepped inside, whispered, "Hello." That's when I saw it. Dozens of shoes lining the hallway, all old, all different sizes, all facing the door. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. The lights flicked on, blinding white, and I heard footsteps in the hallway, but I was alone. The shadows on the wall didn't match mine. They were taller, thinner, and moved, even when I stood still. Suddenly, a cold hand gripped my wrist. I yanked away and ran through the hall, kicking shoes aside. When I got outside, everything went silent. I turned back and the trailer was gone. Just a bare dirt lot with weeds again. I told my neighbor Darlene. She gave me a strange look and said, "That trailer shows up every few years. People go inside, most don't come out. And the ones who do?" She leaned closer. "They aren't the same anymore." I thought she was messing with me until I started seeing that silhouette in my window at night, just standing at the edge of my backyard, never moving, always watching. I set up a camera, left it running all night. The footage showed my backyard empty until 3:17 a.m. when the camera glitched. When the feed resumed, the camera had been moved. It was inside the trailer. It showed the hallway of shoes, the shadows on the walls. And then, just before the footage cut off, a face leaned into the lens, white, expressionless, mouth sewn shut with rusted wire. I moved out the next day, but before I left, I walked to the back of the park, just once more. Lot 13B was still empty, but there were footprints in the dirt, leading up to nothing, then back toward my trailer. Sometimes I still see that porch light in my dreams, flickering on, inviting me closer. And I know someday soon that trailer's going to show up again, and the next poor soul won't be so lucky. When I first moved into the trailer park, there was one lot no one ever touched. Lot 29. It was set back behind the others, with a rotting white trailer and faded pink streamers still clinging to the porch posts. People said it had been abandoned for years, since a little girl died there on her birthday. They said her parents threw her a party cake, candles, balloons, the works. But something went wrong. The girl wandered off. They found her in the woods behind the trailer the next morning. Eyes wide open, smile carved into her face. No sign of who or what did it. They buried her nearby. The trailer sat untouched ever since. Until last week, when someone decorated it again, pink balloons. A banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Emily," in peeling glitter letters. A small cake left on the steps, still warm. No one saw who left it. I walked by and assumed it was some cruel prank until I noticed the candles were lit. In the rain. That night, I heard giggling outside my trailer, high-pitched, playful. I looked out the blinds and saw a small figure skipping down the road. Her dress was soaked. Her head was tilted too far to one side. And when she stopped, she stared right at me from over 100 feet away. I closed the blinds and turned off all the lights. I didn't sleep. In the morning, there was a birthday hat sitting on my front step. Pink, with my name written on it in marker. I went to the park manager, but he brushed it off. "Kids messing around," he said. But when I mentioned Lot 29, his face changed. "Don't talk about that one," he said. "Just let it rot." That afternoon, I drove past the lot again. The cake was gone. But now there were tiny footprints in the dirt, circling the trailer. I started having dreams. A little girl whispering, "It's my birthday," over and over. Each time I woke, something had changed in my trailer. A drawer open, lights turned on. My own childhood toys, ones I hadn't seen in years, sitting in the hallway. 3 nights ago, I heard the knock. Soft, rhythmic, like a child knocking politely. I opened the door, no one there, but the breeze carried a voice. "You forgot my present." I snapped. I stormed over to lot 29 with a flashlight. "What do you want?" I shouted. The trailer door slowly creaked open. Inside was a table set for one, candles, a balloon, and a rotted teddy bear seated at the head. The walls were covered in childish crayon drawings. All of them showed a girl with no face, standing over different trailers in the park. Mine was at the center of each drawing, always burning. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. Laughter erupted behind me. When I spun around, all the drawings had changed now. They showed me, smiling, eyes scratched out, holding the same teddy bear. The lights flickered, something cold touched my back. A whisper in my ear, "Now it's your party." I kicked the door open and ran back home, packed everything I owned, and left that night. But I still get birthday cards in the mail. No return address, just a single message written in a child's scrawl. "You promised you'd come back. If you ever see pink balloons in the middle of nowhere, turn around. Don't go near, don't smile, and never ever forget her birthday." I used to work nights at a cemetery. It was a part-time gig during my last year of university, and honestly, it sounded peaceful at the time. The pay was decent, and the job mostly involved checking that the gates were locked, walking the perimeter, and occasionally filing overnight maintenance logs. The cemetery was old, like late 1800s old, and sat just outside a rural farming town that hadn't changed much in 50 years. My supervisor, a guy named Stan, had been doing this job for over a decade. He looked like he hadn't smiled in just as long. On my first shift, he gave me the usual orientation where the keypads were, how to reset the cameras, how to report vandalism, but then he added one thing that stuck with me.
"Stay away from Section 6 after midnight," he said, dead serious. "And never answer if someone calls your name out there."
I thought he was messing with the new guy. "Is it haunted?" I joked.
He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. He just said, "You'll understand eventually."
Then he handed me a flashlight, a 2-way radio, and disappeared into his truck like a ghost. The first few nights were fine, quiet. Occasionally, I'd see someone from town sneaking in to smoke or drink, but they'd usually scatter as soon as I clicked on the floodlight. Sometimes a cat or raccoon would trip the motion detectors, and I'd have to walk the perimeter and reset the sensors. Nothing creepy, nothing strange. Until my 7th shift. It was just past 1:00 a.m. when I heard it. My name, clear as day, called from somewhere near the old mausoleums. It wasn't loud, more like a whisper riding on the wind, but it stopped me cold. The voice was familiar. It sounded like my mom. That didn't make sense. My mom lived 2 hours away, and she definitely wouldn't be wandering through a cemetery at night. I told myself I was imagining it, just fatigue and wind through the trees. But as I passed the southern path leading to Section 6, I heard it again. Closer. "Daniel." I froze. I know every horror story says that, but I mean it. I literally could not make my legs move for a few seconds. My body wanted to bolt, but something about the voice held me still. It didn't sound like a recording. It sounded real and wrong. Like someone who had practiced my mom's voice but didn't quite get the cadence right. I radioed Stan, but there was no reply. Static. I checked my phone. Full signal. I turned on my flashlight, and against every instinct in my body, pointed it down the overgrown trail to Section 6. The beam caught nothing but fog and branches. Then I heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps. Human footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching the gravel path toward me. Still, nothing in the light beam. I raised my radio again, voice shaking. "Stan, come in. I think there's someone in Section 6. The radio hissed, then crackled to life.
"Get out of there," Stan said. "Now." Don't turn around. Don't speak to it. Just walk.
I didn't ask questions. I backed away from the trail, then turned and ran like hell back toward the gatehouse. I didn't stop until I locked myself inside the maintenance room and slammed the deadbolt. Outside, I could still hear it, my name, over and over, growing quieter like it was drifting back toward the trees. I stayed in that little building for the rest of the night. I didn't even finish my rounds. I kept the lights on, clutched the radio, and watched the live camera feed, though the signal kept flickering like something was interfering with it. At one point, the feed to the Section 6 camera just went black and never came back on. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside and half expected to see something: footprints, disturbed ground, anything to prove I hadn't lost my mind. But there was nothing, no prints, no sign anyone had been out there. Stan showed up around 6 a.m., coffee in hand like it was any other day. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just nodded toward the trees and said, "You heard it, didn't you?" I nodded. "What was it?" I asked. He shrugged.
It's not a person. Whatever it is, it knows things. Sounds like people you trust, but it ain't them. Then he leaned in close and added, "Don't let it in, ever."
I didn't quit. I should have, but I didn't. I needed the money, and deep down I was too curious for my own good. For the next few shifts, I avoided Section 6 like it was radioactive. I stuck to the paved areas, checked the locked gates, and kept my head down. Nothing weird happened again until Halloween. That night, a couple of teenagers broke in. I caught them near the northern fence with a six-pack and a flashlight. One of them ran, but the other kid, maybe 17, froze when he saw me. "Hey," I said, trying to sound more annoyed than scared. "You guys can't be in here." He looked past me toward the path to Section 6. "We saw her," he said. "Who?" I asked. "The girl in the white dress. She was just standing there." I turned to look, but of course, there was nothing. When I turned back, the kid was gone, just vanished. No running, no footsteps, nothing. Like the earth swallowed him. I called it in. Stan arrived 20 minutes later with 2 cops. We searched the grounds until sunrise. Never found the kid. The others we caught later said he split off and was never seen again. They thought he ran home, but he didn't. He just disappeared. After that, I became obsessed. I started researching the cemetery's history. I found old newspaper articles, mostly microfiche scans, that mentioned weird disappearances going back to the 1930s. A gravedigger who vanished mid-shift. A priest who walked into the trees during a funeral and never came back. People heard voices, always someone they knew. One article mentioned Section 6 by name. It wasn't supposed to exist. It had been unlisted on newer maps of the cemetery, overgrown, unmarked. The graves there dated back to before the Civil War. Unregistered burials, the kind that didn't get names or headstones. Just numbers, scratched into stones. If you could find them at all. That's when I realized, whatever was in Section 6 had always been there. It wasn't tied to one person or time. It had just learned to wait. And when it called your name, if you listened, really listened, you were already halfway gone. 2 weeks after Halloween, I made a mistake. It was a quiet night, clear sky, no wind. I felt bold. Stupid, really. I decided to walk into Section 6. Just once. Just to see. I thought maybe if I didn't listen, if I didn't engage, I could make it through and finally understand what had been haunting that place for decades. I stepped over the rusted chain marking the path, flashlight in hand. It was colder there, noticeably colder, like walking into a fridge. The trees grew thicker, lower, and the gravel path faded into packed earth. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Not peaceful, smothered. Even my own breathing felt too loud. The graves were almost invisible. Half swallowed by roots and moss, the stones were cracked, some broken in half. I saw one marked only with X and another that had been shattered completely, as if someone had tried to dig it up and gave up halfway. The deeper I walked, the more wrong the air felt. It tasted like rust and smoke. Then I heard it. My name. Again. Daniel. But this time, it was my own voice. perfectly duplicated, from behind me. I stopped walking, heart hammering. "Daniel," it repeated, closer now, like a mocking echo. I clenched the flashlight and didn't turn around. Then I felt breathing on my neck, cold, wet, deliberate. "Daniel," it whispered again. I turned, I couldn't help it, and saw nothing. But the ground below me was moving, like something was crawling under the dirt beneath the graves. Fast, the trees shifted. Or maybe they didn't. But I swear, they began to curve inward, like they were leaning toward me, closing me in. I ran, not walked, not jogged. I sprinted toward the edge of the section, flashlight beam bouncing wildly. Behind me, the voice screamed my name in a dozen different versions. My mom, Stan, me, the kid who vanished. When I crossed the rusted chain again, it all stopped, like a switch had been flipped. The air was normal. The night sounds returned. The whispering gone. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. I stood there, just past the border, gasping for air. That was my last shift. I turned in my keys the next day, and never came back. Stan didn't ask why. He just nodded and said, "I wondered how long you'd last. I don't know if he still works there. I don't want to know. Some places don't let you leave easy." A few months later, I drove past the cemetery on my way to visit an old friend. I didn't plan to stop, but as I passed the front gates, my radio, which wasn't even on, let out a sharp burst of static. Then I heard it again. My name. Daniel. I floored the gas and didn't look back. I've never returned, but I still have dreams. Always the same. I'm walking among nameless graves, the trees leaning in, and someone I love is whispering just behind me. Sometimes I listen, sometimes I answer. I don't think I'm supposed to, but one night, I might not stop myself in time.
I worked as a cemetery groundskeeper for 8 years in upstate New York, mostly doing basic landscaping, grave prep, and the occasional repair to old mausoleums. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the quiet. Cemeteries didn't judge you. They didn't ask questions. And the dead didn't complain. Usually. It was a small operation, just me and one other guy, Jim, who'd been doing the job since before I was born. Jim had a limp and smoked constantly, but he knew every inch of that graveyard like it was his backyard. "Don't dig deeper than 6, he told me on my first day, no matter what. I assumed he meant 6 feet, grave digging protocol, right? But over time, I started to notice something weird. In the northwest corner of the cemetery, near the oldest plots, the ones with crumbling stones and names worn off, Jim always avoided working alone. And if we had to dig there, he brought a flask. One winter, Jim got pneumonia and was out for a month. The cemetery board still expected plots to be ready on time, so I was left to prep a site in the northwest corner by myself. It was an older burial, reinterment from an abandoned church plot. Just dirt and trees, nothing special, or so I thought. The ground was unusually soft. It hadn't rained recently, but the soil crumbled easy, like something had already broken it up. I went down past 5 feet, but the base was loose, unstable. So I kept digging. 6 feet, 7, even 8. At exactly 8 feet, my shovel hit something. Not a casket, not wood at all. It rang like metal, hollow. I cleared more dirt and found a lid. Square, rusted, bolted shut. It looked like an old hatch, the kind you'd see on a ship or in an old bomb shelter. But it was buried completely flat, no structure around it. Just that metal lid, and a symbol carved into it. It looked like an eye, surrounded by teeth, not engraved, carved deep. I touched it, and my fingers tingled like I'd hit a live wire. Every instinct in my body told me to stop. So I did, for about 3 minutes. Curiosity overrode fear. I used a crowbar from the shed and wedged it under the lid. It didn't budge at first, but then I heard a hiss, like pressurized air releasing, and the hatch lifted with a groan that echoed through the earth. I only opened it a crack, but what came out wasn't air. It was a sound, low, vibrating, like a voice speaking from deep underground, but too slow and guttural to understand. And with it came a smell, like burnt hair and rotting meat. I slammed the lid shut, filled the dirt back in, and left everything right there. I didn't clock out. I just drove home and locked my doors. That night, I woke up to the sound of something dragging across my porch. I looked outside, thinking maybe a raccoon or a fallen branch, but all I saw were footprints in the fresh snow. Bare feet, human. They circled my house 3 times, then stopped right outside my bedroom window. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with a baseball bat, watching the snow melt around those barefoot prints as the sun came up. I followed them in the morning. They led from the woods behind my house, circled the porch, and vanished back toward the tree line. But not before spelling something out on my lawn. It wasn't a word, just that same eye with teeth symbol pressed into the snow like someone had knelt and traced it with a finger. I called Jim that afternoon and told him everything. He was silent for a long time, then said, "You opened the hatch, didn't you?" I told him I'd barely cracked it. He cursed under his breath, then said, "They buried it for a reason. It's not a grave, it's a lock." When I asked what was down there, he said something I'll never forget. Not who, what, and now it knows you. That night, I boarded up my windows and left every light in the house on. Around midnight, my power went out. Total silence. Then, tapping on the back door, not knocking. Tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, like fingernails. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. It stopped after maybe 10 minutes. Then I heard it walking, barefoot, across the hardwood floor of my back deck, slow pacing. I gripped the bat until my hands went numb. Finally, I heard the sound fade away into the distance. The power flicked back on 10 minutes later. I quit the job the next day, told the board I had personal issues. Jim didn't blame me. He just handed me a flask and said, "Don't talk about it, not to anyone local, and whatever you do, never go back there, even to visit." For a while, I listened. I moved to another town, found work as a janitor at a private school, and tried to put it behind me. But weird things started happening. I'd find dirt in my shoes when I hadn't gone outside. I'd hear the sound of shovels scraping in my basement, even though there was no dirt floor. One night, I woke up with a mouthful of soil. I gagged, turned on the light, and saw handprints across the ceiling. Just smudges. But they were upside down, like something had been crawling up there watching me sleep. I reached out to an old local historian, told him I was writing a story about odd cemetery artifacts. When I mentioned the northwest section and the hatch, he went quiet, then said, "There were rumors, something buried before the cemetery was even built, not a person, something older." He said the old property records listed the area as cursed ground. Native tribes avoided it, calling it a thin place, a spot where things could cross over, but only if someone opened the way. And the carvings? Those were warnings, not decorations. I asked the historian if he thought it was still active. He hesitated. "If something like that is stirred," he said, "it doesn't go back to sleep, not without a cost." He suggested I move far away. "Water helps," he added cryptically. "Deep, moving water. It can't follow easily through rivers." So I moved again, this time to Oregon. Rented a place near the Columbia River. For the first few months, things were quiet, peaceful even. But on the 94th night after I left New York, I counted. I heard it again. A knock on the window, same rhythm, same pressure in my chest. That same voice, slow and gravelly, whispering my name. I called Jim the next day. The number was disconnected. I looked up his obituary. He died 2 weeks earlier. Heart failure, alone in his house. His front yard had bare footprints in the dirt. His neighbors assumed it was teenagers. I knew better. I thought about going back to the cemetery, maybe sealing the hatch again, maybe burning the ground. But the hatch was buried. I'd filled it in myself. What good would it do? Whatever I'd awakened had already attached itself to me. I started keeping salt by the windows, left iron nails across my doorways, hung old iron keys above the bed, an old superstition I read online. It helped a little. The whispers stopped for a time, but the dreams didn't. In the dreams, I'm always digging. I don't want to, but I can't stop. My hands are bloody, nails cracked, but I keep digging into that black earth. I hear breathing beneath me, sometimes laughter, and every time I wake up, I swear there's dirt under my fingernails. Last week, I got a package, no return address. Inside was a Polaroid photo. It showed the northwest section of the cemetery, freshly dug. The hatch was open, wide open. The photo was dated 2 days prior. I hadn't told anyone where it was. No one should have known. I don't sleep much now. I've moved again to a basement apartment downtown. No yard, no soil, just concrete and steel. Still, sometimes I hear footsteps in the hallway at 3 a.m. slow. Bare, dragging. They never knock, but I know they're waiting. I've thought about turning myself in somewhere, maybe a psych ward, maybe a church. But what would I say? I opened something that wasn't meant to be found and now it follows me? No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believe myself. But I know what I saw. I know what I hear. So if you ever find yourself digging in an old cemetery and your shovel hits something metal, stop. Don't get curious, don't touch it. Just fill it in. Walk away and forget it ever happened, because there are things under the ground that aren't dead, they're waiting, and they remember who disturbed them.
My family owns a plot of land in rural Kentucky, about 20 acres of wooded hills and thick underbrush that used to belong to my great-grandfather. It's been passed down for generations and most of us never go near it. It's not just remote, it's wrong. People say it feels heavier than it should, like the trees are watching. There's an old cemetery at the highest point on the land, about a dozen stones, most of them cracked or leaning, with dates going back to the early 1800s. All family, great aunts, distant cousins, children that died young. But there's one structure that's not like the rest. A stone vault built into the side of the hill, no door, no window. Just a sealed slab and a name carved into the stone. Thatcher, our last name. My uncle warned me never to mess with it. "It's not a grave," he said, "it's a prison." I thought he was joking. Every Southern family has some weird folklore. Ours was full of it. My dad told me ghosts were real. My aunt believed in Appalachian witches. And my cousin once claimed she saw our dead grandmother walking by the creek. Barefoot, grinning, eyes wide open. I didn't believe any of it. Not until we decided to clear the old cemetery to make space for a new cabin. I was 24 at the time, home from college, broke, and out of options. My uncle paid me cash under the table to chop trees, haul brush, and clear roots. "Just don't touch the vault," he said again. "And don't work after dark." It started small. I'd get to the site around 8 a.m., start clearing fallen limbs and vines. But every time I passed that stone vault, my tools would malfunction. The chainsaw died twice, brand new. My gas trimmer shorted out. Even my phone shut off when I got within 5 feet of the slab. The strangest part was the sound. If I stood completely still, I could hear something underneath, a faint clicking, like long fingernails tapping stone. It wasn't loud. You had to want to hear it. But once you noticed, you couldn't unhear it. After 3 days of clearing, I finally gave in to my curiosity. I waited until dusk, just enough light to see, but late enough that no one would bother me. I brought a crowbar and a flashlight, intending only to pry a piece of the slab loose, just enough to peek inside. Just enough to know. The stone was heavier than it looked. But the moment I wedged the crowbar under the corner, the air shifted. Everything got colder. The woods went dead silent. No bugs, no birds, not even wind. I felt pressure in my ears like I'd gone underwater. Still, I pried. The corner broke with a loud crack and a rush of dust billowed out. Not like old tomb dust. This smelled like sulfur, rotten eggs and old ash. I shined my light inside. The space wasn't big, maybe 6 feet deep, 4 feet wide. But I saw marks. Deep claw marks all over the stone walls, like something had tried to claw its way out. And in the center of the floor was a pile of bones. Not human. Too long, too thin, curved like insect limbs. And at the top, resting on the pile, was a skull, grinning, elongated with far too many teeth. I dropped the flashlight and stumbled back. The light landed facing the vault, and in that beam, I saw something move. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. Dust, maybe. But then I saw it again. Something shifting in the far corner of the vault. A ripple in the air like heat rising off pavement. Then a shape began to emerge. Thin, twitching. Pale gray skin stretched tight over a skeleton that didn't look quite human. It moved like it had forgotten how. Every limb bent wrong. Its head twitched with sharp, snapping motions like it was listening or smelling. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away. Then it turned its head and I swear to God, it smiled. I ran, full sprint downhill through brush and roots. I didn't stop until I reached the road, scratched and bleeding. I drove straight to my uncle's house, burst through the door and screamed, "There's something in the vault!" He didn't look shocked. He just sat down and said, "You let it out, didn't you?" He poured us both a drink. Then he told me the truth. My family had sealed something in that vault over a century ago, something they found in the woods, or something that found them. My great-great-grandfather was part of a group that practiced some kind of Appalachian blood ritual. They thought they could control it, but it got stronger. It fed on them. When they couldn't contain it anymore, they trapped it, buried it alive in a tomb of consecrated stone with symbols carved to suppress its hunger. The claw marks I saw were real. It had tried to escape for decades. And now, thanks to me, it had a crack to slip through. "We're not safe anymore," my uncle said. "Not you, not anyone with our blood." That night, the woods around our house came alive. Dogs barked all night, coyotes scattered and didn't return. We heard branches snapping, not like wind, like something big was moving just out of sight. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to footsteps on the porch. Not heavy, not stomping, but careful, intentional. Something sniffed the air through the screen. I held my breath. Then came a sound I can only describe as a chittering, like dozens of teeth grinding together just outside the window. The next morning we found the barn torn open, not collapsed, ripped, like something had dug claws into the wood and peeled it back. Inside, my uncle's goats were gone, all of them. No blood, no tracks, just scratch marks all over the walls and ceiling. We tried to reseal the vault, returned to the hill at noon, broad daylight. I brought bags of concrete, salt, and a rifle. The slab was cold to the touch, too cold for summer. I never looked back inside. I just poured the concrete, recarved the old symbols, and covered it in stones. My uncle said prayers in a language I'd never heard before. It's been 6 months. We haven't seen it since. But some nights the trees go quiet again. The clicking starts up under the ground, and every so often my trail cameras catch something at the edge of the cemetery, just out of focus, just beyond the light. Watching, waiting. Last month I found claw marks on my bedroom window. 3 long scratches deep enough to catch the moonlight. They weren't fresh, weeks old, but they weren't there before. I'm not sure how they got there. My uncle won't return my calls. I don't know if he's scared or if he thinks I'm cursed. But I don't blame him. I don't want to talk to anyone, not even my family, because once you wake something like that, it doesn't just stay buried. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I hear that clicking again. It's softer now, almost playful, like whatever's beneath the hill is toying with me, waiting for me to slip up, waiting for the slab to crack again. I've moved twice since then. No more woods, no more hills, just apartments and streetlights. But the shadows follow. At night, I feel eyes on me. Cold, empty eyes that don't blink, the kind that never leave. Last week, I dreamed of the vault. The slab cracked open and that creature crawled out. It whispered my name, slow and patient. "Thatcher," it said, voice like 1,000 nails scraping on stone. I woke up gasping, heart racing. I don't know if I'll ever be free of it. Maybe it's tied to my bloodline, or maybe it's just waiting for the right moment to come back. All I know is that every time I hear that clicking, I'm reminded, some things in this world aren't meant to be disturbed. I thought the vault was a prison, but now I'm not so sure. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. And maybe, just maybe, the real terror isn't what's trapped beneath the hill. It's what happens if it ever breaks free. So if you ever find yourself near a forgotten cemetery or an old family vault, or a stone slab carved with symbols you don't understand, do yourself a favor. Walk away. Don't pry. Don't listen to the tapping or the clicking. Because whatever's waiting down there has been patient for a long time, and if it calls your name, don't answer, because once you do, it never forgets. It never lets go, and it always comes back.
Hospitals are beacons of hope. They are places of healing, science, and life. During the day, their halls buzz with a controlled chaos. Doctors rush from room to room. Families wait anxiously in designated areas. Nurses orchestrate a symphony of care, their movements precise and purposeful. The air is thick with the sounds of life, the beeping of monitors, the rolling of carts, the constant hum of conversation. It is a world where every second is accounted for, where logic and medicine are the reigning kings. But when the sun sets and the visiting hours end, something changes. The hospital transforms. It becomes an entirely different world, one ruled by shadows and silence. The transition from day to night is subtle at first. The bright, clinical lights are dimmed, casting long, distorted shadows down empty corridors. The hustle and bustle fades into a low, persistent hum. Footsteps that were once lost in the daytime noise now echo with an unsettling clarity, each one a lonely note in the vast quiet. This is the world of the night shift. It is a time when the veil between the ordinary and the extraordinary feels thin. The stillness is not peaceful. It is heavy, charged with an unseen energy. It's a silence that seems to be listening, waiting for something to break its hold. This is when the stories begin. For those who work the solitary hours after midnight, the hospital reveals its hidden face. They are the guardians of this quiet, liminal space. They are doctors, nurses, therapists, and orderlies who navigate the darkened floors while the city outside sleeps. These medical professionals are trained in science and reason. They deal in facts, in vitals, in diagnoses. They are grounded in the tangible world of the living, but many of them carry secrets. They have witnessed things that cannot be explained by textbooks or medical journals. They have experienced moments that defy all logic, moments that have made them question the very nature of life and death. These are not the kind of stories shared during morning rounds. They are whispered in hushed tones in empty break rooms or shared over a late-night cup of coffee. They are tales of unexplained sounds, fleeting apparitions, and chilling encounters that linger long after the shift ends. These are the experiences that medical professionals are often reluctant to admit for fear of ridicule. But the stories persist because they are real to those who live them. They are a chilling reminder that in a place where life and death are constant companions, sometimes the dead do not rest. They linger in the quiet halls, waiting for the night. The very essence of a hospital is tied to intense human emotion. It is a place of profound joy and devastating sorrow, of miraculous recoveries and tragic losses. Every room, every hallway, every operating theater is saturated with the residual energy of these powerful experiences. Think about it. People are born there and people die there. They fight for their last breath in these beds. They say their final goodbyes in these rooms. This emotional residue doesn't just dissipate when a room is cleaned. It clings to the walls, it seeps into the floors, it becomes part of the building's very fabric, creating an environment ripe for paranormal activity. This is why so many ghost stories originate from hospitals. It is a place where the barrier between worlds seems most fragile. Medical staff are trained to be observers. They notice things others might miss: a subtle change in a patient's breathing, a flicker on a monitor, a shadow in the corner of their eye. They are attuned to the faintest signals of distress. So when they witness something that falls outside the realm of their training, it hits them with a unique force. They are not prone to fantasy. Their minds are sharp, analytical, and focused on reality. When they report seeing a figure standing at the end of a hall, or hearing a voice from an empty room, it cannot be easily dismissed. The stories you are about to hear are not legends or myths. They come directly from the men and women who have walked these haunted halls. They are first-hand accounts from credible witnesses whose careers are built on a foundation of truth and accuracy. These are people who have dedicated their lives to saving others, only to find themselves face to face with something beyond their help. These are the chilling testimonies of a respiratory therapist, a medical intern, and a student nurse. Each one of them encountered something on the night shift that would change them forever, something that defied every law of science they had ever learned. Prepare yourself to enter a world where the lines between patient and apparition blur, a world where a routine check-in can become a terrifying ordeal, where the morgue does not always signify the end of a journey, and where an empty room is never truly empty. These accounts serve as a stark reminder that some places are marked by tragedy. They remind us that even in our most modern, sterile environments, the past is never truly gone. It waits patiently in the darkness, for the right moment to make its presence known, and it always chooses the dead of night. My name is Alex. For years, I worked as a respiratory therapist, specializing in the night shift at a large urban hospital. I preferred the quiet, fewer doctors making rounds, fewer family members crowding the hallways, and most patients were asleep, or at least trying to be. The night had a rhythm of its own, a slow, steady pulse that was a world away from the frantic energy of the day. But that quietness wasn't always peaceful. There was a certain kind of stillness that settled over the hospital after midnight, an unnatural calm that always felt deliberate, as if the building itself was holding its breath. It was a feeling I could never quite shake, a low-grade hum of anxiety that became my constant companion. It was a Tuesday, a little after 2 a.m., when the tranquility of my shift was shattered. The phone at my station rang, its shrill sound cutting through the silence like a knife. It was the nurse from the cardiac floor, a woman named Maria. Her voice was clipped, strained, a telltale sign of urgency that immediately put me on high alert. She told me a patient in room 313 was desatting, his oxygen levels dropping at an alarming rate. On the surface, it sounded like a routine call, something I dealt with almost every night. But there was an undercurrent of something else in her voice, a tremor of fear that went beyond medical concern. She wasn't just worried about his vitals, she was spooked. I grabbed my portable oxygen tank and a non-rebreather mask, my mind already running through the standard protocols. As I made my way through the labyrinthine corridors, the hospital seemed to grow darker, the shadows longer and more menacing. The third floor, home to the cardiac unit, always had a particular chill to it, a sterile cold that seeped into your bones. The lighting up there was notoriously bad, a series of flickering, yellow-hued fluorescent bulbs that hummed with a low, incessant drone. Every creak of the linoleum floor echoed unnaturally, and the walls themselves seemed to absorb sound, muffling the distant, reassuring beeps of the monitors into something faint and ghostly. As I rounded the final corner toward the nurse's station, I noticed something profoundly wrong. The station was completely deserted. There was no charge nurse hunched over paperwork, no aides milling about, not even the usual clutter of charts and coffee cups. It was just an empty desk under the sickly yellow light. A chilling silence had fallen over the entire floor, broken only by the faint, rhythmic beeps from distant rooms. This was more than unusual. It was unheard of. The cardiac unit was a high-risk floor. The nurse's station was the command center, the heart of the unit. It was never, ever left unattended. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Something was very wrong here. I approached the door to room 313, my footsteps feeling unnervingly loud in the oppressive silence. I knocked firmly, announcing my presence. "Respiratory," I called out. There was no response from within, not a sound. I waited a moment longer before pushing the door open, its hinges letting out a soft groan of protest. The air that billowed out from the room was shockingly cold, a stark contrast to the already cool hallway. It carried the familiar, sharp scent of antiseptic, but underneath it was something else, something metallic and old. It reminded me of dried blood, a coppery tang that clung to the back of my throat and made my skin crawl. The feeling of dread intensified, morphing into genuine fear. The patient, a man named Mr. Halperin, was lying motionless in the bed. His eyes were wide open, fixed on a point on the ceiling with an unnerving intensity. The monitor beside his bed confirmed the nurse's call, its display showing a dangerously low oxygen saturation level. Yet, his breathing appeared calm, almost unnaturally so. There were no visible signs of distress, no gasping, no labored chest movements, no panicked expression. There was only that unwavering, vacant stare. He looked like a wax figure, a perfect but lifeless replica of a man. The sheer stillness of his body was more frightening than any struggle for breath could ever have been. "Mr. Halperin?" I asked, my voice sounding small and thin in the cold room. I moved closer to the bed, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the floor. I reached out and touched his shoulder, hoping to elicit some response. A flinch, a glance, anything. His skin was like ice. A jolt went through my arm, a visceral shock that sent a wave of nausea through my stomach. Living human tissue should not feel like that. It was the cold, clammy touch of marble, the unmistakable feel of a body that had already lost its warmth, its life. My training kicked in, overriding the panic that was beginning to cloud my thoughts. I immediately checked for a pulse at his carotid artery, my fingers pressing against his cold neck. Nothing. I checked his wrist. Nothing. His skin was clammy, his body limp. He was gone. I reached over to silence the blaring alarm on the monitor and pulled out my radio to call a code blue, the emergency signal for cardiac arrest. But as I turned back to look at him one last time, something impossible happened. He blinked. It was not a twitch or a spasm. It was a slow, deliberate blink, his eyelids closing and then opening with a surreal calmness. His chest remained still. There was still no pulse, no breath. But I swear to God, he blinked right at me. For a second, I was completely frozen, my hand hovering over the call button on my radio, my mind struggling to process what my eyes had just seen. The room seemed to darken around me, the corners filling with shadows that hadn't been there a moment before. It felt as if the very air had grown heavier, pressing in on me. A man with no pulse, no breath, no sign of life, had just looked at me. It defied every bit of medical knowledge I had, every law of biology. It was a moment of pure, undiluted horror that seemed to stretch into an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the dead silence of the room. Shaking myself from the stupor, I did the only thing I could. I followed my training. I called the code. Within moments, the hallway exploded with the sound of running feet and the clatter of the crash cart. The code team, a doctor and 2 nurses, burst into the room, their faces grim and focused. I tried to explain what I had witnessed, my words tumbling out in a rush. "He has no pulse," I stammered. But he was conscious. He blinked at me. They gave me a brief, dismissive look, the kind you give to someone who is clearly overwhelmed. "Shock can do strange things, Alex," the doctor said curtly. "Sometimes the brain fires one last time." He brushed past me, his attention already on the body in the bed. The doctor performed a quick assessment, confirming what I already knew. Mr. Mady. Halperin was dead. Unquestionably. No heartbeat, no respiratory effort, pupils fixed and dilated. He was pronounced dead at 2:17 a.m. The team worked with a detached efficiency, disconnecting the monitors and preparing the body. I stood by the door, feeling like an outsider in my own experience, my heart still racing as I tried to reconcile the doctor's rational explanation with the chillingly deliberate blink I had seen. After they left, I lingered for a moment, glancing back at the empty bed. The monitor was off, its screen black, but I could still hear a faint beeping, a slow, steady rhythm like a distant heartbeat. The next night, I did everything I could to avoid the 3rd floor, but my pager went off for another patient in the same room. Room 313. This time, I wasn't going alone. I asked the assigned nurse, a woman named Clara, to come with me. She was new to the hospital, and I didn't want her to face whatever was in that room by herself. She was quiet as we rode the elevator up, but I caught her glancing at me nervously, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. As we stepped into the room, she suddenly froze at the doorway, her eyes wide with terror. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She pointed a shaking finger toward the far corner, near the supply cabinet. I looked, and I saw it too. A shadow. A dark, man-shaped void that wasn't cast by anything. The shadow was a patch of pure darkness, denser than the surrounding gloom. It had the distinct silhouette of a person standing perfectly still, watching us. It didn't flicker or fade. It just hung there in the corner. A silent, menacing presence. I instinctively reached for the flashlight on my belt and aimed the bright beam directly at the corner. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating a plain, empty space. There was nothing there. No person, no object, nothing that could have cast such a distinct shadow. But when I lowered the flashlight, I could still feel it. A cold spot in the room, a lingering sense of being watched by unseen eyes. Clara was pale, her face a mask of fear. She took a step back into the hallway, refusing to go any farther into the room. We tended to the patient as quickly as we could, the sense of dread making our movements clumsy and rushed. We barely spoke, the unspoken terror creating a thick barrier between us. Later that night, huddled in the relative safety of the staff lounge, Clara finally broke her silence. "I used to work in palliative care before I came here," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she stared into her coffee cup. "Room 313. It's not right. There are stories." She told me that a patient, a young woman suffering from severe depression, had hanged herself in that very supply closet about a year ago. It happened during the night shift. No one was supposed to talk about it. The hospital had covered it up to avoid a scandal. After my shift, I tried to look it up. As expected, there was no public record, no incident report I could access. Official hospital documents were clean, but the story gnawed at me. I found one of the older, semi-retired nurses who sometimes picked up shifts, a woman who had been at the hospital for over 30 years. When I asked her about a suicide in room 313, she hesitated, her eyes darting around as if to make sure no one was listening. Finally, she nodded grimly. "It happened," she admitted in a low voice, We don't assign that room anymore unless we're completely full. There are too many occurrences. Over the next few weeks, her words proved to be prophetic. Every single patient assigned to room 313 experienced bizarre and terrifying issues. There were sudden, unexplained breathing problems. Patients reported vivid hallucinations, seeing figures standing over their beds. One elderly man, in a fit of panic, tried to climb over the bed rails to escape and ended up breaking his leg. The most disturbing case was a young woman admitted for a minor arrhythmia. I responded to a code in her room one night to find her thrashing in the bed, gasping for air and screaming, "She's standing over me, get her away." We managed to sedate her, but she never regained consciousness. She passed away the next morning, her death officially listed as unexplained. My name is David, and this happened during my medical internship at a small, rural hospital. It was one of those old institutions where the staff was stretched thin, and interns like me had to rotate through every department imaginable. That included the morgue. I hated the morgue. It was located in the basement, a cold, sterile pocket of the hospital that felt disconnected from the world of the living above. The air down there was always heavy with the smell of chemicals, cold metal, and something else, something cloying and organic you couldn't quite name. It was a silence that felt different from the quiet of the patient floors. It was a deep, profound emptiness, as if even the air molecules had given up and ceased to move. Our training required us to assist with the transportation and documentation of deceased patients. It was a grim, necessary task that no one wanted. Even the most hardened orderlies would find excuses to pass the duty off to someone else, anyone else. But as the junior intern on the totem pole, I had no such luxury. I had no choice but to do as I was told, to face the part of medicine that everyone else preferred to ignore. The finality of it all was something you could never truly get used to. Each trip to the morgue was a stark, cold reminder of the limits of our abilities, a confrontation with the one outcome we were all fighting to prevent. One night, deep into a grueling 24-hour shift, my pager buzzed with a call that made my stomach clench. I was needed to help the night orderly, a man named Luis, move a body from the ICU down to the basement morgue. The patient had coded and been pronounced dead during the evening rounds. I met Luis outside the ICU doors. He was a quiet older man who had worked at the hospital for decades. He looked exhausted, a permanent weariness etched into the lines on his face. But tonight, there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of unease that I hadn't seen before. "Another one," he muttered, shaking his head slowly. "That's the third one this week." I hadn't been tracking the numbers, but his tone sent a chill down my spine. "All from the same room?" I asked, a sense of foreboding creeping over me. He just nodded grimly. "Room 206, you noticed that too?" We began the long, silent journey, pushing the gurney through the hospital's maze of quiet, dimly lit hallways. The patient was zipped securely inside a thick, black body bag, but I couldn't help but glance at the paper tag attached to the zipper. Male, mid-40s, no known complications listed on his chart. The official cause of death was sudden cardiac arrest. Just like that, he was gone. Another life extinguished within the walls of room 206. The elevator ride down to the basement felt like a descent into another world. The hospital was old, and its machinery groaned and wheezed with every floor we passed, the sounds echoing in the small, confined space. When the metal doors finally shuttered open, the cold of the morgue hit me like a physical blow. It was a damp, penetrating chill that went straight to the bone. The morgue was even darker and more foreboding than I remembered, illuminated by a single, bare overhead bulb that flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes. It felt like walking onto the set of a low-budget horror film, only this was terrifyingly real. Luis went over to a small desk in the corner to sort out the paperwork, leaving me alone with the gurney. I leaned against the cold, tiled wall, trying to project an air of calm I did not feel. I was trying to rationalize my fear, telling myself I was a man of science, trained to see death as a biological process. But theory is one thing. Standing in a flickering, subterranean room with a freshly deceased body is another entirely. The silence was absolute, broken only by the low hum of the refrigerated storage units. That's when I heard it. A soft, dragging sound. A faint, dry scrape of fabric against metal. I immediately straightened up. My senses on high alert. I thought maybe Luis had dropped a pen or a clipboard, but when I looked over, he was still standing at the desk, completely engrossed in his work. The sound had come from right beside me. It had come from the gurney. My eyes locked onto the body bag, and my blood ran cold. The zipper had moved. It had only slid down by an inch, maybe 2, but I knew for a fact that it had been zipped all the way to the top when we left the ICU. A wave of panic washed over me, my heart starting to pound in my chest. "Luis," I called out, my voice coming out as a shaky whisper. "Are you sure this guy was officially declared dead?" Luis walked back over, the completed form in his hand, a look of weary annoyance on his face. "Time of death was 8:16 p.m., he recited from memory. I was there. No heartbeat, vitals were flat for over 20 minutes. "He's gone." He frowned, sensing my panic. "Why do you ask?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger at the zipper. "I didn't touch that," I managed to say. He followed my gaze, and his expression hardened. He stepped forward and, without a word, zipped it firmly back up. "Sometimes air escapes the lungs," he said gruffly. "Muscles twitch post-mortem. It's normal." But his eyes betrayed him. It didn't feel normal. Not at all. We slid the gurney into one of the empty, refrigerated chambers. The heavy, stainless steel door closed with a loud, definitive clang that echoed through the cold room. Luis turned the handle, locking it securely. We finished the documentation in silence, the only sounds being the scratch of his pen on the clipboard and the incessant, maddening hum of the cooling units. He handed me the clipboard to add my signature, and I saw that my own hands were still trembling so badly I could barely form the letters of my name. The simple explanation he had offered replayed in my head, air escaping, muscles twitching, but it did nothing to soothe the primal fear that had taken root in my gut. Back upstairs, in the bright, sterile environment of the main hospital, the encounter in the morgue began to feel like a bad dream. I tried to push it out of my mind, to bury it under the mountain of charting and patient checks that awaited me. But around 4:15 a.m., as I was updating the patient location board, a name caught my eye. It was the same name from the tag on the body bag, the man we had just taken to the morgue, but he wasn't listed as deceased. He was listed as being in post-op recovery. I stared at the board, my mind reeling. It had to be a mistake. A clerical error. I blinked, rubbing my tired eyes, and when I looked again, the name was gone. The space was empty. I found the charge nurse and asked if she had seen anything strange on the board, if anyone had made a mistake. She just shook her head, gave me a tired smile, and told me I desperately needed coffee. Maybe she was right. Maybe exhaustion was making me see things. I retreated to the break room and collapsed into a chair, closing my eyes for just a few minutes. I must have dozed off, because I was jolted awake by a sudden, loud noise. It was a metallic clatter, a sharp, violent sound that echoed up from the floors below. It was a sound I recognized instantly. It came from the morgue. I checked my pager. No new calls, no alarms. There was no logical reason for me to go back down there. But an inexplicable force pulled me. I took the stairs this time, my heart pounding with each step, a dreadful premonition growing stronger with every floor I descended. When I reached the basement, the main overhead light in the morgue was out. The room was plunged into near darkness, lit only by the faint crimson glow of the emergency lighting. And then, I saw it. The chamber door, the one we had locked just hours before, was standing wide open. The gurney had been pulled out halfway into the room, and the body bag lying on it was completely empty. For a moment, I was paralyzed by sheer terror. My mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. The empty gurney, the open chamber, the oppressive, watching silence of the morgue. Every rational thought evaporated, replaced by a single, primal instinct: run. I turned and fled, not looking back, my feet pounding on the concrete floor as I sprinted up the stairwell. I didn't stop running until I burst back onto the brightly lit floor of the ICU, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. Luis was at the nurse's station, and the moment he saw the look on my face, he knew. His own face went pale, his weary expression replaced by one of resignation and fear. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and grave. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded defeated. "Where is he?" I choked out, my voice ragged with panic and exertion. "The body is gone." The chamber was open. Luis didn't answer right away. He just stared at the polished linoleum floor, as if the answer was written there. "You're not the first one this has happened to," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "That room. Room 206. Every patient who dies in there doesn't stay dead, not right away." I stared at him, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" "That's impossible." He proceeded to tell me a story that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Over the past year, 6 different patients had died in room 206, all under strange or unexpected circumstances. Every single one of them had been officially pronounced dead, with no signs of life. And every single one of them had been at the center of a bizarre incident in the morgue. There were stories of locked chambers found open, of identification tags being mysteriously swapped, and, in 2 other cases besides mine, of bodies vanishing from their gurneys only to be found later, moved to a different, unlocked chamber. The occurrences were always dismissed as clerical errors or pranks by overworked staff, but Luis knew the truth. A week after my terrifying experience, a memo was circulated. Room 206 was being closed indefinitely for renovations. Hospital staff were told it was due to issues with the plumbing and ventilation systems, but we all knew the real reason. The room was never renovated. The furniture was removed. The number was taken off the door, and it was sealed shut. They never reopened it. It remains an empty, silent void in the middle of the 2nd floor. The official story is that the hospital simply didn't need the space. But those of us who worked the night shift, those of us who had made that long walk to the basement, we knew why that door would remain locked forever. Some places hold on to death, and whatever was in room 206 refused to let its victims rest in peace. My final year of nursing school included overnight shifts at a long-term care hospital, mostly elderly, mostly silent. The administration called it character building. They promised quiet. They didn't warn us about the kind that presses in on your mind. My supervisor, Mrs. Chuma, was all business. She told me, "Walk the East Wing every hour. Check vitals. Don't deviate." As she left, she paused. "If you see someone in the halls who shouldn't be there, stay put. Don't follow, don't ask." I thought it was a joke. Her face said otherwise. Alone under the desk lamp, her warning echoed in my head. All the patients here were bedbound. Who could possibly be walking? At 2 a.m., I started my rounds, the only sound, my shoes squeaking. Room 118, Mr. Nkosi, 6 years in a coma, unresponsive, unchanged. His room was frozen in time, the monitors beeped steady as ever. As I passed, I heard something impossible, a whisper. Not the hum of a machine, not the sigh of an old building. Whispering, from a room where no one should speak. I stopped, heart pounding. Listening to the dark, I froze, listening. The door to 118 was ajar, darkness inside. No TV, no radio, no visitors. But I heard 2 voices sown near the bed, one farther away, frantic and conspiratorial. Mr. Nkosi couldn't talk. No one should be in there. I pushed the door open. The whispering stopped. Silence, except for the monitor's glow. Mr. Nkosi lay motionless except his eyes were open, focused, tracking me. His chart said, non-responsive, eyes always closed. This was impossible. He stared, aware, as if warning me. I stepped back. The monitor's steady beep flatlined into a shrill whine. I ran for help. Mrs. Chuma met me. Already knowing, "Room 118? I nodded. She muttered. "3rd time. Every time they wake, they die within minutes." The code team revived him briefly, but he died again at 2:19 a.m. I stood in the corner, haunted by those knowing eyes. Some awakenings are final. After the code, we moved Mr. Nkosi's body. The memory of his stare lingered. The next night, I walked the same rounds, anxiety twisting inside me. Room 118 was empty, but the whispering returned louder from inside the walls. "My name," repeated in a chilling whisper. I stumbled back. The lights flickered, then blazed painfully bright. At the end of the hall, a figure in a hospital gown stood, unmoving. I called out, but it didn't respond. I approached, cautious. 10 feet away, the hallway plunged into total darkness. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight. When I shone it, the figure was gone. The light snapped back on. Mrs. Chuma stood behind me, face grim. "I told you," she said, "don't follow them. Some warnings are meant to be obeyed. I never forgot." In the lounge, Mrs. Chuma told me the truth. Every coma patient in 118 woke up and died within minutes. After each death, staff saw a silent figure in the east hallway, sometimes a nurse, sometimes a patient, always watching. "Why use the room?" I asked. "Not enough beds," she said, "and it always comes back to 118. The next night, a new patient was moved in. I did my rounds, dread heavy in my chest. At 2:12 a.m., the whispering started. I kept walking, eyes forward, remembering the warning. The lights went out. Bare feet shuffled behind me. I didn't look back. The whispers grew louder, then stopped. The lights returned. The hall was empty. The new patient died the next day. No cause, no warning. I finished my rotation and vowed never to return. On my last night, the intercom crackled as I passed 118. A voice whispered, "You're next." I transferred to the ER. There, at least, the ghosts come with sirens. Some places never let you go. Some warnings echo forever. These stories aren't rare. Hospitals are soaked in life, death, and fear, haunted by more than memories. What happened in room 313, the morgue, and the East Wing are reminders. The veil is thin, and staff are the first to see through it. These encounters become unspoken folklore rooms, quietly closed, hallways avoided, elevators shunned after midnight. The beeping from an unplugged monitor, the whisper from an empty room, symptoms of a haunted building. The scars linger on the people who witness them. Healthcare workers trust evidence. But what if the evidence is impossible? A blink from a dead patient, a voice that knows your name. These moments shatter logic. They force us to face the unknown. The persistence of these stories proves, even in a world of science, ancient fears survive. At night, hospitals become primal spaces where barriers crumble. Haunted rooms and restless spirits are more than tales, they're testimony from those who've seen the other side. Where life ends, the story isn't always over. Sometimes it's just beginning. For the nurses, doctors, and therapists who work the night shift, learning to cope with these unsettling experiences becomes a necessary survival skill. They develop a unique set of unwritten rules, a shared understanding of how to navigate the haunted spaces within their workplace. This is not something taught in medical school. It is a curriculum learned on the job, in the dim light of a deserted corridor at 3 a.m. The first rule is often to rationalize. The sound was just the building settling. The flicker of movement was just a trick of the light, a product of exhaustion. This is the mind's first line of defense, an attempt to fit the inexplicable into a logical framework. But when rationalization fails, when an experience is so direct and undeniable that it cannot be explained away, a different coping mechanism takes over: compartmentalization. The encounter is locked away in a mental box, not to be opened or examined too closely, especially during a shift. To dwell on the terror of seeing an apparition or hearing a disembodied voice would make it impossible to function, to provide care to the living patients who depend on them. They learn to push the fear down, to operate with a detached professionalism even when their hearts are pounding with primal dread. It is a testament to their resilience that they can continue their duties in the face of such profound and personal horror. Sharing the experience with trusted colleagues is another crucial coping strategy. The hushed conversations in the break room, like the one between Alex and Clara, serve a vital purpose. They are a form of validation, knowing you are not alone. that others have seen or felt the same thing, is a powerful antidote to the fear of being dismissed as crazy or unstable. These shared stories build a silent support network among the night shift staff. They create a bond forged in shared fear and mutual belief, a silent acknowledgement that says, "I know what you saw and I believe you." This camaraderie makes the long, dark nights more bearable. Ultimately, however, many medical professionals cope by simply accepting that there are things they cannot control or explain. They learn to coexist with the unseen residents of their workplace. They might say a quiet word of acknowledgement when entering a notoriously active room, or avoid looking too closely into the dark corners of the morgue. It becomes a delicate dance of respect and avoidance. This acceptance is not a sign of defeat, but a form of wisdom. It is the understanding that in a place so deeply intertwined with life and death, one must be prepared to encounter both, sometimes long after the heart has stopped beating. It's the quiet truce they make to get through the night. The stories of Room 313, Room 206, and Room 118 all end in a similar way, with a door being closed for good. A room is converted to storage. A wing is sealed off for renovations. A number plaque is removed from the wall, erasing the location from the hospital's official map. This act is the ultimate admission of defeat. It is the hospital administration, the embodiment of science and order, tacitly acknowledging that there is a force at play within their walls that they cannot diagnose, treat, or eradicate. It is a silent surrender to the supernatural, an unspoken agreement that some places are too broken, too saturated with tragedy, to be reclaimed by the living. These closed-off spaces become monuments to the stories that haunt the hospital. They are physical reminders of the events that staff are forbidden to discuss openly. For the new hires who ask what lies behind the unlabeled door, the simple answer of storage is a protective lie. It shields them from a truth they are not yet ready to face. The real warning is not spoken aloud. It is conveyed in the averted eyes of the senior staff, in the sudden change of subject. The warning is clear: do not ask, do not look, and do not try to open that door. Some knowledge is a burden, and the history of these rooms is the heaviest of all. These stories serve as a powerful reminder of the profound impact that place can have on paranormal phenomena. It's not just about a ghost being tied to a person. It's about the energy of an event being imprinted onto a physical location. The suicide in the supply closet, the string of unexplained deaths, the final, desperate moments of a coma patient. These events create a psychic wound on the environment itself. The room becomes a focal point, a tear in the fabric of reality where the past continuously bleeds into the present. Closing the door does not heal the wound. It simply quarantines it, hoping to contain the infection. In the end, what these chilling accounts teach us is a lesson in humility. They remind us that for all our medical advancements and scientific knowledge, we remain profoundly ignorant about the true nature of consciousness and what, if anything, comes after death. The men and women who walk the hospital halls at night are witnesses to this mystery. They stand on the border between two worlds, and sometimes something crosses over. The stories they tell are not meant to simply scare us. They are a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, and a chilling warning that some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. And if you ever hear a code alarm from behind one of them, the best advice is always the same: do not answer it. I took the job because I needed to get away. Away from people, from noise, from my own mistakes. When the Coast Guard called offering me a 6-month post as lighthouse keeper on Fenmore Isle, I didn't hesitate. They said it was an easy gig: one light, one generator, and a simple weather report to transmit daily. Quiet as the grave, the agent joked. I should have paid more attention to that part. Fenmore was 15 miles off the coast of Maine, a jagged rock with a single crumbling cottage beside the old lighthouse. The last keeper, a guy named Palmer, had retired early. No explanation. Left in the middle of the night, according to the Coast Guard. I figured maybe he went stir-crazy. I was wrong. My first week was uneventful. I settled into a routine: check the light at dusk, log the weather, drink coffee, read, sleep. The only sound at night was the wind and the distant crashing of waves. But on the 8th night, I heard something new, knocking. It wasn't at the door, it was from inside the lighthouse tower itself. Hollow, deliberate, like someone tapping on the inside of the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the spiral steps, calling out. Nothing. But the moment I stepped onto the top deck beneath the lens, the knocking stopped. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. Knocking, always 3 short taps followed by silence. I checked the tower every time. Empty. Until the 12th night, when I found something carved into the inside of the metal hatch. I'm still here. I radioed in to the mainland. The signal was fuzzy. They dismissed it as isolation getting to me. "Don't go writing ghost stories out there, Collins," the officer said with a laugh. But I hadn't told him what the message said. I tried to ignore it. Blamed the wind. The structure settling. But then came the dreams. Always the same. I was standing at the top of the tower, looking out over the sea, and behind me, someone was breathing. Heavy. Close. When I turned, there was no one there, but the door would always slam shut, trapping me inside. I started sleeping with the radio on, desperate for human voices. But one night, around 3 a.m., the radio went dead, then crackled back to life. A voice came through. Not a broadcast. A whisper. It said, "Third keeper. Still here." Over and over. I did some digging. There were supposed to have only been 2 keepers before me since Fenmore's automation was revoked. Palmer and a man named Dryden, but old Coast Guard logs I found in a storage cabinet mentioned a third name, Keeper J. Knox. The date beside his name? 1903. No retirement, no reassignment, just a note. Lost. That night, I stayed in the tower, sat beside the lens with a thermos of coffee and my journal. I waited for hours. Nothing. Until just after 2:00 a.m., when the light began to spin by itself. The generator was off, the manual crank untouched. Yet the lens turned slowly, casting its beam out into the black water. Then I saw him. A figure on the rocks below. Pale, thin, wearing what looked like an old oilskin coat. He didn't move, just stared up at me. I blinked, and he was gone. I nearly fell down the stairs trying to get outside, but when I reached the shore, there were wet footprints leading away from the water, toward the base of the lighthouse. The inside was cold, not just chilly cold, breath-visible cold. I could see my exhalations even though it was May. Then the knocking started again, louder, faster, not from the walls now, from beneath the floorboards. And something was whispering, "Duty never ends." I lost time, hours. I remember opening the trap door to the generator room and then waking up on the rocks outside, face down, salt water in my mouth. The door to the lighthouse was wide open. On the inner wall, smeared in soot, were the words, "3 must serve. You are the 3rd. I tried to leave the next morning, called for a pickup. They said weather was too rough, even though the sea was calm as glass. The boat never came. Every day I called. Every day the answer was the same. I was stuck. That was 3 weeks ago. The light spins on its own now. The journal pages write themselves. Every night I hear footsteps on the stairs, and every morning I find wet footprints near the hatch. I no longer question it. I keep the light burning. I make the reports. I am the 3rd keeper. And when the next one comes, if they ever come, I'll be waiting. There's a stretch of rocky coastline near Nova Scotia, where ships used to vanish with disturbing regularity. The charts blamed the tides, the fog, the magnetic anomalies. But the locals whispered about the widow's lamp, a light that wasn't the lighthouse's, and one that no sailor ever lived to follow. When I took the temporary keeper job at Ravensgrave Light, no one mentioned that name. Not until after my second supply boat failed to show. I was stranded for 9 days, alone on that cliffside tower, surviving on dry rations and boiled rainwater. It was on the 5th night of isolation that I saw a small, flickering orange light far down the shoreline, moving like it was carried in someone's hand. I assumed it was another keeper. Maybe an old post that hadn't been properly decommissioned. So I followed it, down the rocky slope, along the wind-blasted cliffs, nearly twisting my ankle on the loose shale. But no matter how far I walked, the light never got closer. Just bobbed ahead calmly, patiently. I stopped after a half hour and turned back. That's when I noticed something terrifying. The lighthouse was no longer visible, not behind me, not anywhere. Just pitch-black horizon, and the sound of waves crashing far below, and the light, it was now behind me. I ran, tripped, sliced my hand open on a rock, but I didn't stop until I saw the tower again. When I got inside, my pulse hammering, I climbed to the lens chamber and looked through the foggy glass. The orange light was still moving across the rock slowly now, like it knew I was watching. The next morning, I found a woman's scarf caught on the weather vane outside the tower. Faded, torn, still damp, despite no rain for 3 days. And it smelled of salt and something faintly sweet like lilacs. I asked the Coast Guard during my next radio call if there was ever a shipwreck survivor in the area. Or maybe a female keeper. There was a long pause before the voice replied, "Just stay out of the rocks at night, Collins." That was all they said. And then the static swallowed the signal again. On the 8th night, the dreams started. A woman in an old-fashioned black dress, standing just beyond the tower's door. Her face hidden by a mourning veil, her hand always raised, holding that same flickering lantern. She never spoke. She just waited. When I awoke, my boots were soaked and covered in mud. My door was wide open, and a wet footprint, bare, narrow, unmistakably feminine, led across the floor and vanished at the base of the stairs. I locked everything, blocked the door with furniture, but it didn't matter. At 3:17 a.m., the lamp on my desk flared to life on its own, and outside the lens chamber window, her lantern floated into view as if she were standing halfway up the side of the tower. Desperate for answers, I broke open the storage hatch and pulled out the old logbooks. Most were mundane entries about weather and maintenance until I found Keeper Hammond's final notes from 1911. The last line read, "She waits at the edge with her light, but the path leads down, not to shore." I followed that riddle the next evening, took a rope and a headlamp and climbed down a crevice near the cliff base. There I found it. A tunnel carved by sea and time, leading inland beneath the rock. The air was wet and cold. The smell of lilacs overwhelmed me. At the end of the tunnel was a cove hidden from sight, even from the air. In its center stood a tiny shack with a lantern on a post. And beside it, the woman. I only saw her for a moment, but that was enough. Her skin was pale gray, bloated like something long drowned. Her veil fell away as she smiled, a mouth full of black water and broken glass. I fled, barely made it back to the tower. I tried to radio the Coast Guard again, but the signal had vanished. The light at the cove still burns every night. And sometimes the rocks whisper. "Follow it," they say. "She just wants to be seen." I've only got 5 days left in my post, but I don't think I'll make it. Each night, the lantern draws closer. Now it's at the base of the tower. I've locked the doors, nailed the windows shut. But deep down, I know I looked into the widow's lamp, and no one survives after that. Story 3. The Mirror Room. The lighthouse on Black Hollow Cay wasn't on any modern map. I found it by accident while reviewing old maritime charts at the Naval Archive. A note scribbled in the margin caught my eye. Warning. Light reflects wrong, avoid nights with fog. I laughed at the time. Superstition. But when a restoration project opened up for retired lighthouses in the region, I volunteered. Black Hollow was one of them. No one else wanted it. From the boat, the tower looked like every other, narrow, whitewashed, capped with a rusted red dome. But the moment I stepped ashore, I felt it a strange pressure, like standing in the eye of a storm. The air buzzed with something just outside the edge of hearing, like low whispers under the wind. The keeper's logbook was untouched since 1964. The final entry chilled me. The mirror watches. Light no longer shows the way. It only traps what it sees. The rest of the page was torn, the ink smudged as if waterlogged. I almost left that night. I should have. The tower was strange inside. The steps didn't feel quite right, too steep in some places, too shallow in others. The higher I climbed, the more the angles warped. I reached the lens room on the third day. Instead of a standard Fresnel lens, I found something else entirely. The entire room was paneled in antique mirrors. They were old, silver-backed, warped, stained at the edges. Dozens of them, arranged like a prism around the central lantern. Some reflected the room perfectly, others did not. I stared into one and saw the staircase behind me, but instead of the lantern I held, the reflection showed me carrying a candle. From then on, things started going missing. My boots disappeared. My watch stopped. I'd find my journal moved to places I hadn't left it. I chalked it up to forgetfulness until I looked into one of the mirrors and saw a version of myself sleeping but wearing the missing watch. I began studying the mirrors. They didn't reflect me anymore. They showed variations. Me, yes, but with subtle changes, older, thinner, bleeding, or smiling in ways I never had. Sometimes they looked at me. That's when I knew they weren't reflections. They were versions. On the 7th night, I stayed in the mirror room. I wanted to know if they could interact. Around 2 a.m., the fog rolled in thick and fast. The lighthouse light switched on by itself, even though I'd shut down the generator. And the mirrors came alive. They shimmered like water, and one of them rippled outward. My reflection stepped out barefoot, eyes sunken, mouth sewn shut. It looked at me, tilted its head, and then smiled. Not my smile, something worse. It raised its hand slowly, and the glass behind it cracked. I tried to run, but the staircase kept shifting. I descended 6 floors and still ended up at the top. The mirrors hummed now, a low drone like an organ note held for eternity. Each surface showed another version of me dying, rotting, screaming, trapped. One mirror showed nothing, just darkness. I stared into it too long and saw something else, a place of total silence where versions of me were piled up like broken dolls, eyes wide with horror. I realized then, this place didn't reflect possibilities. It collected them. When I broke one of the mirrors, it bled. Thick black ichor ran down the wall, and the hum became a roar. A dozen reflections began slamming their hands on the inside of their glass, desperate to get out. One cracked halfway through. Its hand reached for me. I sealed the door to the lens room and barricaded it. Since then, I've lived in the base of the tower. I smashed every mirror I could find outside the chamber. But sometimes, even in the windows, I catch glimpses of things that shouldn't be there. Eyes. Smiles. Fog. I tried to radio for help. Static. Then my own voice replied, "You are already here." I stopped trying after that. I don't know how long I've been here. The calendar stopped matching the days. My reflection doesn't age anymore, but I do. If anyone finds this, don't go up the tower. Don't look into the mirrors. Don't light the lamp. Black Hollow doesn't warn sailors anymore. It traps them. And now, I think I've become part of it. My reflection doesn't match me. I think soon, it will come out again. My job was simple: monitor radio transmissions from offshore lighthouses that had been automated but still sent regular status pings. I worked night shifts out of a crumbling coastal station in Newfoundland. The job was mostly boring, one coffee-fueled blur of static and routine timestamps. That is, until one night, I picked up a signal that wasn't on any list. It came in at exactly 2:11 a.m. A thin whine, at first like distant Morse code, layered beneath wind. Then a voice. Not synthetic, like the automated lighthouses used, but human. And terrified. All it said was, "This is Keeper 9. Please respond. They won't let me leave." There was no Keeper 9 in the system. Every lighthouse had a designation, and there were only 6 registered keepers active in the entire region. I cross-checked frequencies. The signal seemed to originate from Carrick Point Light, decommissioned in 1982 after the original structure was damaged in a storm. I reported it to my supervisor. He muttered something about ghost channels and told me to log it as interference. "Carrick's dark," he said. "There's nothing there to transmit." But I couldn't let it go. I started manually tuning to that frequency every night. And every night, the message changed. Still here. Still waiting. They keep walking past the windows. Tell my wife I didn't jump. They live in the fog now. I began recording the transmissions, but when I played them back during the day, all I got was white noise. Like whatever it was, only spoke when no one else was around. I tracked the signal strength, and it didn't make sense. Some nights it was faint, like it came from miles offshore. Other times it was so strong it felt like it was inside the room with me. That's when the dreams started. I dreamed of a tall iron lighthouse, half swallowed by the sea. Its windows were shattered. The stairs inside twisted in impossible directions. And always there was a man calling from the top, but when I reached him, he had no mouth. By the second week, I started seeing things during my shift. Shapes moving behind the glass door. Shadows crossing the floor where no one walked. And always that same voice crackling through the speaker. Please come. It's so cold, so dark. They wait in the light. I snapped on the 14th night. Rented a boat under a fake name and motored out to where Carrick Point Light was supposed to stand, a jagged rock island barely wide enough to hold a tower. But there it was, the lighthouse, standing tall, intact, and the light was spinning. That couldn't be. The Coast Guard removed the lens in 1990, but I saw it bright as a spotlight. I docked on the rocks and climbed the steps. The door was open. Inside, the walls were covered in scratches, names, dozens of them, all etched in desperate handwriting. I recognized one of them, Jack Moreau, a keeper who went missing in 1974. His name was never cleared. He was assumed drowned. I found his signature next to the words. They said I had to stay, one for every decade. I climbed to the top. The light spun lazily, casting long beams into the clouds. The lens was intact, and beside it stood a man in a faded keeper's coat. He looked right at me, and I saw my own face, pale, hollow, eyes red-rimmed with tears. He opened his mouth, but instead of words, a rush of radio static poured out. I stumbled back down the stairs and fled to the boat. As I pulled away from the rocks, the lighthouse light shut off behind me, the fog closed in, and for a moment, the whole thing vanished from sight. Back on land, no one believed me. The station logs from that night were erased. The recording I made? Blank. But every night, just after 11 a.m., the signal comes back, stronger, clearer. And now it calls me by name. I haven't gone back yet, but I know the truth now. That signal wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. And one day soon, I'll answer it. Because you don't hear Carrick Point. You join it. Story 5. The Storm That Never Came. They warned me about storms before I took the job. The Gulf weather changes fast, they said. You'll see lightning on the horizon and have 30 seconds to prepare. But what no one told me was that sometimes the storm doesn't come at all, and that's worse. I learned that at Arliss Point Light, a lonely tower that hadn't seen a keeper in 40 years. Until me. The place wasn't even on the modern logs. I found the posting buried in an old NOAA job board. 6 weeks, emergency coverage while the new systems were installed. A boat dropped me off with a radio, enough food to last, and a warning. If you hear thunder without wind, get inside. Don't look out the window. The first 2 weeks were calm. Boring, really. I watched the skies, kept the beacon rotating, and read old novels. The light spun perfectly. The waves crashed like clockwork. But on the 14th night, I woke up at 3:33 a.m. to a single, deafening crack of thunder. The air was still. No rain, no clouds. Just that one massive sound, like the sky splitting open. I rushed up to the beacon chamber and looked out. There were no ships. No waves. In fact, the water was glass flat, perfectly still in all directions. And then I saw them. Lights. Dozens of tiny white lights just off the horizon. They weren't boats. They didn't move. They flickered like candles, floating in air. I leaned closer to the glass, and one of them blinked red. Then, another. Then all at once, they vanished. The next morning, I found water dripping from the inside of the windows. The salt crust patterns looked like rune symbols I didn't recognize. That night, I saw the lights again. Closer this time, and I swear I heard voices not carried on the wind, but from inside the tower. The thunder returned on the 18th night. No rain, just that same terrible crack and a low rumble that went on for over 20 minutes. It wasn't thunder. It was a chant, a droning sound like hundreds of people humming in unison, vibrating the walls of the tower. I tried to radio the Coast Guard. Static. Then a strange clicking sound. Then, my voice, saying, "He won't make it past the 21st. I hadn't spoken yet. The voice was predicting me. On the 20th night, the lights reached the base of the tower. I watched from the top as the sea rolled back like it was retreating from the shore, and figures walked across the ocean floor. Pale, shimmering, dozens of them, maybe more. They surrounded the base, never looking up, just standing still, watching the tower, waiting. I turned off the beacon light, hoping to make them leave. That was a mistake. The very moment the beam stopped, every single figure looked up at the same time. Their eyes glowed with the same white light I'd seen offshore. I collapsed onto the floor, praying. And then, they moved, crawling up the outside of the tower. Not climbing, crawling like insects on glass, their limbs bending at impossible angles. I ran, locked myself in the generator room. I don't know how long I stayed there, long enough for the sun to rise. When I finally came out, the tower was empty again, but the light was back on. I hadn't touched the switch. I packed that day, called the boat. They didn't answer. But I heard the horn from offshore that night, long and deep. When I looked out to the horizon, the sea was gone again. And this time, the storm was inside the lighthouse. Lightning flashed in the stairwell. Salt water flowed up from the floorboards. The beacon spun wildly, lighting figures not outside, but in the corners of every room, whispering, watching. I tried to leave, but every door now opened into the same place, the light chamber. That was 7 days ago. I don't think time passes here anymore. The storm didn't come to the island, it came from inside it. It's in the walls, in me. If you ever take a lighthouse job and they mention Arliss Point, don't go. It's not a building. It's a beacon for something else. Something waiting just beneath the still water. It was supposed to be the perfect weekend getaway. My friends and I, 6 of us in total, had been planning this camping trip for months. We'd chosen a remote forest near the edge of a national park in the mountains. None of us had ever been there before, but the allure of the isolation and the promise of a relaxing weekend in the great outdoors seemed like the perfect escape. We rented an RV for convenience and packed our gear. Tents, sleeping bags, food, and enough beer to last the weekend. The first day was everything we had hoped for. The weather was perfect, not a cloud in the sky, and we spent the afternoon hiking and gathering wood for the fire. As night fell, we set up camp around a large clearing surrounded by dense trees that stretched up into the dark sky. We cracked open some beers, built a fire, and settled in to tell stories. It was all so peaceful, so idyllic, until we heard the first scream. At first, we thought it was part of the night's ambiance, the cry of a wild animal, maybe a coyote or a mountain lion. But the sound wasn't quite right. It was human sharp, desperate, the kind of scream that freezes you in place. I looked at my friends, but they didn't seem to notice. They were too busy laughing, talking, and poking at the fire. I shook my head, chalking it up to the wind playing tricks on me, and tried to push it from my mind. But then we heard it again, louder this time, closer. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. My friends stopped mid-sentence, looking at me in confusion. "What?" one of them asked. I strained my ears and listened intently. The silence that followed felt oppressive. Then, in the distance, we heard it, a blood-curdling scream, unmistakably human, echoing through the trees. "I'm not hearing things, right?" I asked. my voice almost a whisper. One of my friends, Ben, stood up and grabbed a flashlight. "I'll go check it out," he said, trying to sound brave. I didn't think it was a good idea, but before I could protest, he was already disappearing into the woods. The rest of us stood around the fire, unsure of what to do. The screams kept coming, more frequent now, like someone was in genuine distress, calling out for help. It felt wrong. Something didn't sit right. Ben had been gone for nearly 20 minutes when we decided we needed to go after him. I grabbed a flashlight, and the others followed suit. The forest was eerily quiet, save for the crunch of leaves under our boots and the occasional crack of a branch in the distance. We walked for what felt like hours, but the screams kept leading us further into the woods. Just as we were starting to lose hope, we saw Ben's flashlight beam in the distance. We rushed toward it, relief flooding my chest. But as we got closer, that relief quickly turned to confusion and dread. Ben was standing by a tree, his flashlight pointed to the ground. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. We asked him what was going on, but all he could do was point. There, in the dirt, were two sets of footprints. One was clearly human, but the other, it didn't make sense. It was smaller, more erratic, like someone or something had been dragging its feet. The prints were fresh, too fresh, and they led deeper into the woods. But what unsettled me the most wasn't the footprints, it was the fact that Ben was shaking. "I saw them," he whispered. "There was someone out there watching us. I don't know how, but they were watching." "Ben, what are you talking about?" one of my friends asked, clearly unsettled. "There were figures," Ben continued, "just standing there, between the trees. I couldn't make out their faces, but I could see them moving. I couldn't move. I don't know how long I stood there. They were just standing, staring at me. And then I heard the scream again. It was close. It was so close. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. The forest around us suddenly felt like it was closing in. The air grew thick with tension, and every rustling leaf seemed louder than the last. I looked around, trying to see what Ben had seen, but the darkness was absolute, swallowing up the forest beyond the reach of our flashlights. "We need to go back," I said, my voice shaking. Ben nodded, his gaze darting around nervously. But before we could move, there was a sound distant at first, but then growing louder. A low, guttural growl, unlike anything I had ever heard. It sent a wave of cold terror through me. Whatever was out there in the forest wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, and it was getting closer. We turned to head back toward camp, but the path felt unfamiliar, the trees closing in on us in a way that made no sense. The growl was followed by a shrill scream, human, frantic and desperate. My heart pounded in my chest as I fumbled with my flashlight, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, a figure, pale and gaunt, standing motionless between two trees. Its arms hung limply by its sides, and its face was completely still, as if frozen in time. It was a silhouette against the moonlight, but I could make out the shape of its head, its crooked posture. It looked wrong and unnatural. "Run!" I screamed. We bolted, pushing through the dense forest, tripping over roots and branches. The growling was behind us now, louder, closer. Whatever was chasing us, it was gaining on us. We didn't look back. When we finally made it back to the RV, we slammed the door shut and locked it. I turned the key in the ignition, desperate to leave, but the engine wouldn't start. Panic set in. My hands were trembling, sweat pouring down my face. The growling had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. We sat in that RV, huddled together, listening to the sounds of the forest, waiting for daylight. We never saw what had been watching us in the woods that night, but I know one thing for sure. The forest didn't want us there, and something had been waiting for us to leave. We packed up and left first thing in the morning. No one spoke of it again, but I know the others saw what I saw. That figure in the woods. The growl. The scream. Some things, once you hear them in the woods, are better left unexplained. It had been a long day, and we were all eager to set up camp and call it a night. My cousin, Tom, and I had planned this camping trip for weeks, hoping to get some time away from the stress of work in the city. We picked a spot along a mountain trail, tucked away in a quiet, less-traveled corner of a state park. It was the kind of place where the only sounds at night were the wind and the occasional rustle of animals in the underbrush. Or so we thought. The first few hours were perfect. We found a spot by a creek, set up our tent, and made a fire. The sun was setting, and we spent the evening roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. Tom was a big fan of ghost stories, so we spent a good part of the evening trying to one-up each other with spooky tales. I wasn't really one for the supernatural, but it was fun to indulge him. As the fire died down and the stars started to take over the sky, we decided to call it a night. We doused the fire and crawled into our tents. I had just gotten comfortable, the sounds of the forest lulling me toward sleep, when I heard something that made me freeze. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a branch snapping or a twig breaking under the weight of some small animal. But then, I heard it again, footsteps, slow and deliberate, like someone walking through the forest. They were distant, but not so far that they couldn't be heard clearly. It was odd. I couldn't shake the feeling that the steps weren't from any animal. I poked my head out of the tent and looked around. There was no one. The woods were dark, but the moonlight gave me enough visibility to see the trees and brush around the clearing. The sound of the footsteps continued, though. They weren't in any specific direction, they just seemed to circle around the camp. "Tom," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. "Do you hear that?" Tom groggily replied from his tent. "Hear what? I'm trying to sleep." "Footsteps," I said louder this time. "Someone's out there." He was silent for a moment, and I could tell he was starting to wake up. "Maybe it's just a hiker," he suggested, but his voice didn't sound convinced. We both listened carefully. The steps didn't sound like someone just passing through. They were purposeful, methodical, almost like they were pacing around us. I wanted to ignore it. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the longer I listened, the more I realized there was something wrong. It wasn't the sound of someone on the trail. It was closer. Too close. "Okay, that's weird," Tom finally said, his voice sharper now. "I'm going out to check it out." "No, Tom, don't. Just stay in the tent," I protested, but he was already unzipping it. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the night. I waited, holding my breath, straining to hear anything that might explain what was happening. The footsteps didn't stop. In fact, they seemed to get louder. They weren't circling anymore. Now they were coming straight toward us. I looked outside the tent, trying to catch a glimpse of Tom. I saw him walking toward the edge of the clearing, his flashlight bobbing in the dark. The woods were so dense around us that even with the light, he was barely visible. The sound of footsteps continued, now unmistakably closer. I could almost feel the presence of whoever or whatever it was moving through the trees. Then I heard something that made my heart stop. A voice. It was soft at first, like someone calling out, but I couldn't make out the words. It was like a low murmur, almost like chanting. My blood ran cold. "Tom!" I called out, my voice shaking. "Get back here now!" There was no response. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cold air, holding the flashlight in my trembling hand. The woods were still. Too still. The footsteps had stopped. But that murmur, it was still there, like an echo coming from the darkness. I moved toward where I'd last seen Tom, my heart pounding in my chest. The air around me seemed thicker, colder. Every rustling leaf or snap of a twig made me jump. Then I saw it. Tom was standing near a large boulder on the edge of the clearing, just standing there, his flashlight on the ground. His face was pale, his eyes wide, like he'd seen something that had frozen him in place. I called out again, but he didn't respond. I approached cautiously, and as I got closer, I could see that he was shaking. "Tom, what's going on? What did you see?" His voice was barely audible, a whisper lost in the wind. "There's someone behind that tree." I looked where he was pointing, but the tree he was referring to was empty. I strained my eyes, hoping to see anything, a figure, a shape, something that could explain his fear, but the darkness revealed nothing. "Tom, you need to come back to the tent." "This isn't funny," I said, trying to steady my voice. But he didn't move. Instead, he just kept staring into the darkness. His breathing was shallow, ragged. "I saw him," he whispered again. "I saw someone, a man, standing right there. I didn't know what to make of it. There was no one there." And Tom was starting to freak out. I grabbed his arm and pulled him away from the boulder. As we turned to head back toward the tent, I heard something. A low, guttural growl. It was close. Too close. And I didn't know what was out there, but I didn't want to find out. My body went into autopilot. I yanked Tom's arm and ran, not even looking back, just praying that whatever we'd encountered would stay behind us. When we got back to the tent, we didn't sleep. We sat there in the dark, huddled together, our eyes glued to the shadows outside. The sounds of the forest, the chirping of insects, the occasional rustle of leaves seemed so distant now. All we could hear was the pounding of our own hearts. The next morning, when we finally dared to leave the tent, we found that the area around the campsite was completely undisturbed. No footprints, no sign of anything. It was as if the events of the previous night had been a dream. But I know what I heard. I know what Tom saw. We packed up and left without a second thought, and neither of us spoke of the incident again. Sometimes the scariest part of camping isn't the unknown. You can always deal with that. It's the things you hear in the night that you can't explain. The things that don't make sense. The things that follow you even after you leave. Story 3. The Shadows by the Lake. My friends and I had been planning this camping trip for over a year. We wanted to spend a long weekend at a remote lake deep in the forest, far away from the bustle of everyday life. No cell service. No distractions, just the quiet sounds of nature and the occasional crack of a campfire. We found the perfect spot, nestled between a cluster of tall pines, with a small, serene lake at its center. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, the air still warm from the late summer sun. The lake sparkled in the distance, inviting us to take a swim. But we decided to set up camp first. After a couple of hours of unloading and arranging the tents, we decided to take a walk along the lake's edge. The stillness of the water and the towering trees made everything feel peaceful. Almost too peaceful, but we didn't think much of it. By nightfall, we had a fire going, surrounded by logs and camp chairs. We joked, drank, and ate, like any group of friends would do. The sound of the fire crackling and the gentle rustle of the trees in the evening breeze filled the air. The lake was barely visible in the dark, its surface reflecting the light of the fire in a strange, almost unnatural way. The first thing I noticed was how silent the woods around us had become. No frogs croaked, no insects hummed. It was as if the entire forest had gone still. I tried to brush it off as just my imagination, but then I heard something that made my blood run cold, a soft, distant whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe one of my friends messing around, but it came again, this time louder, more distinct. It wasn't coming from the camp, it was coming from the other side of the lake. I stood up and looked toward the far bank, but all I could see was the reflection of the moon on the water. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My friend Jake, sitting next to me, looked up from his phone and nodded. "Yeah," he said, his voice tinged with concern. I thought it was just the wind at first, but the whispers came again, soft, unintelligible words that seemed to drift across the water like smoke. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "Who's messing around?" I asked, turning to face the group. But they were all as confused as I was. No one had been near the lake, and none of us had made a sound. We all stood up, looking toward the far side of the lake. The trees there were too thick to see through, and the reflection of the moon made the water look unnaturally still, almost as if it was holding something beneath its surface. "Maybe we should check it out," Jake suggested. He was always the adventurous one, always the first to suggest something risky. We weren't exactly sure what was going on, but we felt the need to investigate. So, we grabbed a couple of flashlights and walked toward the water's edge. The further we walked, the more the whispers seemed to grow. It was as if they were coming from all directions, bouncing off the trees and the water. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the kind of whisper you hear when someone is standing just out of sight, speaking in a language you don't understand. When we reached the shore, The sound seemed to stop. The air was thick with silence. It felt as if we had crossed some invisible line, and the forest itself had drawn a veil of quiet around us. But there was something wrong. I could feel it. I could feel the weight of the night pressing in from all sides. I stepped forward, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The water was eerily still, undisturbed by the wind. It looked almost like a mirror, reflecting the stars above and the silhouettes of the trees on the opposite shore. But then, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. On the far side of the lake, near a group of boulders, there was movement. Just a flash of something, a shadow darting between the rocks. At first, I thought it was an animal, but the shape was wrong. It moved too quickly and too deliberately, as if it knew exactly where it was going. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Everyone turned to look, but the shadow was already gone. "Probably just a deer or something," Jake said, though his voice was less certain than usual. But I could tell he was shaken. We all were. We stood there in silence, staring at the spot where the shadow had been. The whispers were gone now, but the feeling of unease had only grown stronger. There was something out there, something in the forest, just beyond the reach of our lights. "We should go back," I said, my voice tense. Everyone agreed, and we quickly started making our way back to the camp. But as we turned to leave, I heard something else. A low, guttural sound coming from the opposite side of the lake. It wasn't an animal. It was too deep, too distorted, like it was coming from the throat of something that didn't belong in the forest. It was a growl, and it wasn't distant. It was right behind us. We all froze, our eyes darting around, searching the darkness for whatever was making that sound. But there was nothing. Nothing except the oppressive weight of the forest closing in on us. "We need to get out of here," I said, panic creeping into my voice. We turned and ran, stumbling through the trees toward the campsite, the sound of our footsteps mingling with the growl behind us. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, the darkness seemed to grow thicker, the trees moving as if something was watching us. When we reached the campsite, we were out of breath, hearts pounding. We didn't speak right away. We just sat there, trying to catch our breath, listening to the night around us. The fire was still burning, but it didn't seem to offer any comfort. The whispers were gone. The growl had stopped. But we couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the firelight. We stayed up the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch. But as the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, we packed up our things and left without a word. We didn't talk about it on the drive home. None of us did. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. The whispers, the shadow, the growly weren't just tricks of the mind. Something was out there, watching us, waiting for us to leave, and I'm not sure if we ever truly left. Story 4. The Cabin in the Woods. It was meant to be the perfect weekend getaway, a secluded cabin deep in the woods, miles from civilization. My girlfriend, Rachel, and I had been dating for about 6 months, and we thought it would be a good idea to take a break from the noise of the city and reconnect with nature. We rented a small rustic cabin that seemed like the ideal spot for some peace and quiet. We even brought our dog, Max, a black lab who had been a loyal companion since I was a kid. The drive up to the cabin was long, winding, and filled with picturesque views. By the time we arrived, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the trees. The cabin was older than I expected, with a sagging roof and weathered wood, but it had a charm about it. There was a small porch with a swing, a fire pit in the back, and a lake just down the hill. It felt isolated in the best way possible, perfect for a weekend of relaxation. We spent the first evening unpacking and settling in. Max ran around the yard, sniffing at the trees and chasing sticks, while Rachel and I enjoyed a bottle of wine on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. There were no sounds except for the occasional rustle of the leaves and the distant call of a bird. It was as peaceful as we'd hoped. That night, after a simple dinner, we built a fire in the living room, settled onto the couch, and watched an old horror movie on my laptop. It was nice, cozy even, and the wind howling outside added an extra touch of ambiance. Around midnight, we decided to go to bed. I took Max outside for his last walk of the night while Rachel got ready for bed. The cool air had a bite to it, and the wind was picking up, causing the trees to creak. It was getting late, and I could feel the weight of the isolation pressing in on me. As I walked down the small trail toward the woods behind the cabin, Max's ears perked up, and he began sniffing the air intensely. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, pulling him back as he started toward the tree line. Max barked once, low and deep, and I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The wind had died down suddenly, and there was an eerie silence that filled the air. I could no longer hear the sounds of the trees or the distant birds. It was as if the forest had become dead quiet. Max, usually so confident and friendly, was now standing rigid, staring into the trees. I called his name and tugged on his leash, but he wouldn't move. There was something unsettling about the way he was behaving. I glanced over my shoulder at the cabin just a few hundred feet away, but it suddenly felt like it was miles away. I shook off the creeping unease and pulled Max back inside. We locked the door, and I tried to brush off the feeling that something was watching us. I went to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being stared at. I kept the blinds closed, but every time I glanced out the window, it felt like there was someone standing just outside the light's reach. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of Max growling quietly at the door. His low, guttural growls were a warning I'd never heard before. My heart began to race as I sat up in bed, straining to hear anything unusual. The cabin was completely silent, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards as Max paced back and forth. I tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having it. He wouldn't stop growling. "Max, it's okay," I whispered, though my voice didn't sound convincing. I stood up, walking to the door and peering through the peephole, but there was nothing. Suddenly, the growling stopped. I turned to see Max standing at the window, his head cocked to one side, his eyes wide and focused on something outside. I followed his gaze, my breath catching in my throat. There, just outside the cabin, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but as I stared longer, I could make out the shape of a person standing in the darkness. They weren't moving, just standing perfectly still, their body hidden in the shadows. I could barely make out their features, but I could tell they weren't supposed to be there. Something about them felt wrong. I froze, my hand hovering over the door handle. My first instinct was to check on Rachel, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the figure. Slowly, I backed away from the window, keeping Max close. I didn't want to make a sound. I crept over to Rachel's side of the bed and shook her awake. "Rachel, wake up," I whispered urgently. "There's someone outside." Her eyes snapped open, and she sat up, looking at me in confusion. "What? Are you sure?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I saw someone. They're standing outside. Don't make a sound." Rachel's face drained of color, and she quietly climbed out of bed. We both moved to the corner of the room, staying out of sight from the window. I could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on us, but it was broken when we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch. Rachel gasped, and I clamped a hand over her mouth, my heart hammering in my chest. Whoever it was walking around the cabin, slowly, deliberately. Every step seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. I had no idea what to do. I wanted to grab my phone and call the authorities, but there was no signal out here. No way to reach anyone. We were completely alone. I looked at Rachel, and she looked back at me, fear in our eyes. Max was still standing by the window, his body tense, his fur raised along his back. The footsteps stopped, and there was a long, unsettling pause. Then, just as quietly as they had appeared, the footsteps started moving away. We waited, breathless, until we couldn't hear them anymore. After what felt like hours, I slowly moved back to the window and peered outside again. The figure was gone, but the porch light flickered, casting eerie shadows across the yard. The sense of unease didn't leave. We spent the rest of the night huddled in bed, barely sleeping, listening to every creak and groan of the cabin. By morning, the figure was gone, and everything outside seemed normal again. We waited until daylight to leave, but the drive back was eerily quiet. We didn't talk much about what happened, but neither of us could shake the feeling that someone or something had been watching us in the woods. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there that night, but the thought of that figure standing outside the cabin, waiting in the shadows, still sends a chill down my spine. Story 5. The Uninvited Guest. It was supposed to be a routine weekend getaway, just me and a couple of my college friends. We had rented a small cabin in a remote part of the woods near a lake we had visited many times before. We had grown up going on camping trips, so this wasn't anything new. In fact, it was supposed to be relaxing, a chance to unwind and reconnect. But as we soon learned, nature has a way of turning even the simplest plans into something far darker. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, and the weather was perfect clear skies, a light breeze, and just the right temperature for a cozy evening by the campfire. After unpacking, we decided to take a walk around the area. The cabin was nestled deep in the woods, far from the nearest town, so the only sounds you could hear were the occasional rustling of leaves and birds singing from the trees. We weren't alone, though. There were other cabins nearby, but they seemed abandoned. Old, weathered structures with overgrown lawns and broken fences. They didn't give off an inviting vibe, but we weren't worried. We were here to relax, not to look for ghosts. That first night, we built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and sat around talking. We'd stayed up late, laughing, telling stories, and reminiscing about old times. As the fire burned low, we decided it was time to call it a night. I went to bed in the small bedroom at the back of the cabin, while my friends Emily, Jake, and Matt settled into the other rooms. I was half asleep when I heard a faint scratching sound coming from outside the cabin. At first, I thought it was just the wind or an animal. But then it came again, closer this time. It was rhythmic, almost deliberate. It didn't sound like an animal at all. More like someone or something was tapping gently on the side of the cabin. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. I glanced at the clock too. 13 a.m. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the scratching continued, faint but constant. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew something wasn't right. I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand and went to the window. I could barely see anything in the dark, but I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the dirt just outside the window. They were small, almost childlike, but there was something about them that made my stomach turn. They didn't belong to any animal I recognized, and they were far too close to the cabin. I quickly pulled away from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to wake my friends, but part of me didn't want to acknowledge what I had seen. What if it was just an animal? What if I was overreacting? But the scratching, that was real. I sat on the edge of the bed listening to the silence. The scratching had stopped, but the unease remained. I tried to fall asleep, but my mind kept racing. What if someone was out there? What if they had been watching us all night? Just as I was about to drift off, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. It was faint, but it was enough to make my heart stop. The door to the cabin had been locked. I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. My friends' rooms were silent, and I didn't want to disturb them unless I was sure something was wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had entered the cabin. I slowly got out of bed and crept down the hall. I moved quietly, trying not to make a sound, but as I reached the living room, I noticed something strange. The front door was wide open. The wind was pushing it back and forth, creaking with every movement. I stepped into the doorway, my flashlight beam sweeping across the porch. The air was cold, and the smell of damp earth filled my lungs. I could see no one, but that's when I saw it on the ground just outside the door. Small handprints. Not from a child, but from something else. Something too small to be human, but too large to be an animal. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but my body was frozen in place. I turned and ran back to the bedroom, locking the door behind me. I sat there in the dark, clutching the flashlight, my heart pounding in my chest. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating. It wasn't until morning that I dared to check the rest of the cabin. When I did, I found that everything seemed undisturbed except for one thing. There was a chair near the front door, one we had left outside to dry the night before. It was now sitting inside the cabin, right next to the door, as if someone had brought it in during the night. My friends were still asleep, unaware of the events that had unfolded. I didn't want to scare them, so I kept quiet, trying to act like nothing had happened. But I couldn't ignore the fact that someone or something had been in the cabin with us. And what's worse, they had left something behind. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur of unease. We stayed close to the cabin, spending most of our time by the lake, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the woods made my heart skip a beat. Every creak of the floorboards had me turning around, expecting to see someone standing behind me. When it was finally time to leave, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I didn't mention what happened to my friends. They were having too much fun to notice anything out of the ordinary, and I didn't want to ruin their trip. As we drove away, I glanced back at the cabin. It stood there in the distance, looming like a dark memory. I could almost feel the weight of the forest pressing in on me, as if it was holding something just beyond the trees. Something that wasn't quite human. To this day, I don't know who or what visited us that night, but I'll never forget the feeling of those small, unnatural handprints. And every time I go camping, I still check the door before I go to bed, because I know that sometimes the things you invite into the woods aren't the only things that show